Hey, everybody, I'm Mike.
I'm Tim.
I'm Chris.
Yes.
And I'm Korby.
And this is the Board Game Rundown, and we are live from our basements because we cover games from the ground up. We've got some great guests with us tonight. We've got Chris and Korby from Tempest Workshop, which used to be Prospero Hall in a way. And we're happy to talk about that and get into all of that. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Let me just say, Chris, thank you so much for responding to my random, message via Facebook that I sent you. But when you broke the news, like, because everybody heard, oh, Prospero Hall is gone, and it's like, well, holy crap, like, what's happening? Like those poor people. I have no idea how many people were even involved. I didn't know anybody involved, or any of the names. But then I saw your post. Hey, look, we're doing this new thing. And I'll let you, I'm not going to butcher trying to third-hand describe, what that was.
I already did, Tim. Don't worry.
A while ago. But I'll let you guys introduce it. But I had to reach out because I was so curious. I wanted to hear it straight from you guys. And again, I said this to you off camera. I say this all the time. I'm a nerd for this stuff. I love this stuff. I love hearing all the behind-the-scenes stuff. It gives me such an appreciation for the industry and the hobby, and and really like when you sit down and you play a game, doesn't matter what kind of game it is, you can almost marvel at how much effort and blood, sweat, and tears it takes to get that onto a table. It seems damn near impossible.
Yeah, it's not easy for sure. Yeah, I mean, thanks for having us. Thanks for reaching out. I think that you caught us at a good time because we were kind of just getting things off the ground and kind of seeing what was kind of happening with our studio and stuff, and so glad to jump in and talk to you all and kind of unveil the curtain just a little bit and as much as I can, at least.
Sure.
We're excited to chat.
And then so Korby, were you also at Prospero? Were you part of the?
Oh yeah, I actually started at Forest Museum Creative in 2014. So I was pretty early when I joined. They were doing kids games, like a lot of licensed stuff, a lot of Disney stuff, even things like activity kits and science kits and things like that.
Okay.
And then pretty quickly, like within 2 years, we started acquiring more talent. I brought in a really good friend of mine, Brian Kirk and Jessica Setti, and more game designers came in, and more people with some really unusual backgrounds. People that weren't even from necessarily game design. People from theater world, people from the musical world, material science world, things like that.
Oh, wow.
And so they were like, well, let's do some more interesting things. And then, and then we started getting into the more of the gateway Euro strategy games for American mass, which eventually led to Prospero Hall. So that was like 2 or 3 years. And then Chris came on. So I was there at 2014 FPC, and then Funko Games bought us. And then I was there for another 4 years. So I was there for a total of 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's really is as much as like the, I don't know, snobby gamers, like that they scoff at mass market appeal, blah, blah, blah. I was always really excited to see stores like Target, like carrying games that I would be interested in playing. And I was really, glad that I never regretted saying, hey, don't turn your nose up at Jaws, or some of these games, right? Like, no, they're fun. Like, you should try them. Just because you saw it on a Target shelf, doesn't mean that,
By the way, I was on the Jaws was my project along with Brian Kirk. I'm pretty proud of that game. There's a few games I've done. I'm like, at any moment, if anyone wants to play it, like, I'll drop and do it. To answer your question, though, I always would say this to people during that time. where we would see sort of this rise of medium weight strategy games at mass. I would always tell people, like, I have good news about America.
Mhm.
I know that we talk about, like, we feel like America is getting worse and stupider. I'm like, I know for a fact that, like, Villainous is selling really well in Oklahoma. Like, that's actually kind of inspiring to me. And I'm from Texas, so, you know, so I'm from the South. But yeah, no, I thought it was a fun time. I mean, things have sort of changed. There's cycles in the retail, of course. And so there is sort of a reeling back from at mass from like $40 plus games and things. But we were there for the rise of it, and it was exciting. I liked it. I'm a fan of just Trojan horsing anything in life, you know. And so it was fantastic to be there at that point and for that rise. I loved it.
I mean, you guys were really kicking a door open. I'm sorry, Chris, go for it.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I kind of want to give a little bit of background to the studio, because I again, you know, we talked a lot about how the stuff that we did was kind of under the radar a bit when it comes to just folks knowing how the studio functions. So Forest Present Creative was an invention studio that existed since the early 2000s. I mean, it had been around for a long time. The founders of it, Andy Allen and Jay Wheatley was brought on as well. They came from entertainment experience design. So there was a sort of a restaurant slash. I want to say it's like kind of an escape room before escape rooms were actually a thing. It was you have dinner, but there's also all these types of games and activities that you can do while you're in the environment.
It was
completely revolutionary.
It was called Antros. And they had like almost live game shows with actually hosts and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. It was a very unique concept.
So they were doing that for a while, and then they got introduced to the folks who designed Cranium and began working on a bunch of Cranium products. And so for a long time, that was kind of the thrust of what FPC was. Now, obviously, I wasn't there back then, and there's all these a lot of clients and work that they did along the way. But to kind of to bring it back to the Prospero Hall stuff. So when I started there around 7 years ago, what is that, 2017, something like that, around 2017ish, I think. They were just starting to get into these gateway strategy games. Force Present Creative was, and they were still an invention studio that was still selling, you know, projects to all sorts of different publishers. And they had caught some success actually with Bob Ross, Art of Chill.
Art of Chill,
which was a really sort of subversive, weird project that was kind of this gateway strategy game that, you know, most people would say had no right being a gateway strategy game, not what people expected at all from a Bob Ross game. And it was kind of this really like punk indie type weird thing that they made. And from there, they started to see a kind of a shift towards mass market being more accepting. At the time, the target buyer was a gamer himself, and he was really into sort of like the hobby games. And so they saw an opportunity to kind of make more of those. And that's kind of where I came in during that period. As Korby mentioned, they started kind of ramping up the game design team, and they started reaching to folks who were more on the hobby side of things than the mass market side of things. And so from my personal background, I was a content creator. I was doing branding and marketing for a bunch of FLGSs out here in the Seattle area called Mox Boarding House. And I was also an independent designer. So I was doing game designs. I was going to conventions. I was pitching publishers. And then I actually decided to self-publish a game with one of my best friends called The Last Garden. And we started a little publishing company called 1000 XP. And while I was kind of in the midst of that, I got introduced to the folks at Forest Present Creative. And they were like, would you like to come in and do some contract game design for us? You know? And so when you do contract work for Forest Present at that time, it was a full-time gig. And so I was like, well, I have a job. Like, I mean, I can't just do contract work. And they said, we'll give you a 9-month contract. And I was like, well, you know, when am I going to have the opportunity to do this again? So I did it. I left the job I loved. I cried on my boss's shoulder. She was super supportive. And I was just like, I have to go do this. I had been at that place for 7 years at that point, and I loved it. And so I went to Force Present Creative. And in all honesty, I was expecting, because we all have sort of our thoughts about what this process might be, or what studios that make mass market games, how they function. I was expecting to go there for a year or two, get some experience doing mass market games, and then go back to self-publishing. That was like my thought process. But what I discovered was that the creative soup that we had at Forest Prison Creative, and ultimately, which kind of reflected into the Prospero Hall style of games, which we can talk about in a second. That was super fulfilling to me. And I think that as someone who, when I was doing content creation, when I was podcasting, I had a podcast called NPC Cast. We did a lot of RPG, tabletop, board game stuff. I had a YouTube channel called 1000 XP, where I talked about game design and all those types of things. And I was kind of growing as a content creator, much like yourselves. And my thrust had always been about introducing new people to the hobby. It's something that I grew up loving. It's something that I really feel games can save lives, and it's something I'm very passionate about. And so I wanted to introduce as many people as possible. And I was like, one way to do that is to make a really kick-ass Goonies game, because someone who likes Goonies but maybe has never played Hero Quest might jump in and try it and fall in love with it. And then they might go buy Hero Quest, and then they might go play Gloomhaven, and they might be in as deep as a lot of us are. And that to me was really satisfying. It's one thing to make a game and, to get it in the store, see it in the store, have your name on it, have all the accolades. That's one type of sort of fulfillment that we can get. And I've been lucky to have that to a small extent with the game I made before I worked at FPC. But there's another thing to get a text from your mom with a picture of her holding your game in Target.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And talking about how she talked to the person at Target and told them that her son made that, and all.
Oh wow.
That's a different type of fulfillment that you get, And so for me, it was always about trying to shatter people's expectations, trying to put the best damn game that we could in every single box, regardless of the license, regardless of the IP. Give me a monster cereal game, and I'll make it the best that I can possibly make it. Give me a Brady Bunch game, I'll make it as good as I can possibly make it. That was our philosophy. Did we always hit it out of the park every time? No, but we damn sure tried, and we never left anything on the field. We tried our hardest to put the best quality products we could in every game. And so I'll take a break now to talk about, and we can talk a little bit about the Prospero Hall era before we get into the Funko Games era, because I was also part of that transition as well. But that's kind of Tim, what you're talking about with this idea of shattering expectations in the mass market. That was our goal, and I think that obviously I'm a bit biased for the home team, but I think Prospero Hall really did a lot of interesting things with licensed games in the mass market aisle. And I think a lot of ways we sort of set the trend that other studios looked at, and have made some amazing products based kind of on our quote unquote formula, at least as much as they could tell what our formula was from outside.
I mean, now I'll say this as someone who owns a 1980s copy of the Mr. T board game. Like what you guys did, though, the really interesting thing about what you guys did, your whole group, your whole team as a collective, is those IPs are what I'm guessing, because it's what I saw with my own experience. Having those IPs, Goonies, Jaws, Top Gun, all those things, that's what got people that weren't Mike and I to pick that game up off the shelf, or maybe a parent is like, oh, my kid loves Goonies, right? And they buy that game, not thinking much about it, right? In their brain, they might be thinking some roll and move, with some cards and paper money. And instead, I think that every Prospero Hall game I've ever played, we kind of universally described as better than it had any right to be, because you go in with low expectations initially, and then we learned, we got on to you guys, we caught on oh no, these games are actually pretty good. I mean,
as far as I'm with you. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when a licensed game, you never even picked it up, and I feel like we changed that. But I'll tell you, I mean, when we get something like a Back to the Future or a Jaws, like Back to the Future, which I did too. I'm watching Back to the Future, all three of them.
You can tell
10 times in a row. You're keeping track of what are the characters, what are the objects, what are the key scenes. We're having philosophical conversations. Chris, I remember, was in the first one. What does it even mean to the culture? We're not even talking about games yet, what do people expect? There was a thing, to get specific about that scenario, time travel. I think when people think about Back to the Future, they think about cool DeLorean, time travel. Isn't it awesome? And then you watch the movies and it's that kind of wasn't the point. Indiscriminate time travel with no consequences. That's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Back to the Future, we read a quote. One of the things that crystallized it for us, the project, was Bob. I can't believe I forgot. Is one of the two screenwriters. He said that time travel and Back to the Future, it was never the solution. It was always the problem, right? Like someone accidentally goes back in time. They're like, oh my God, whoa, things are wrong. We got to figure things out. All right, we got to set all these things up, set this up, and we're going to do this right. And I hope it works. Like, it's kind of nerve wracking watching all the movies again. But we're like, but wait a second. If it's transferred to the culture as something else, do we respond to that? Or do we respond to what the films are? This is the conversation for days before we even talk games. We haven't even talked about the game yet. It's just like, what is the spirit that we want to do from this? But we tend to dive into these IPs as, I mean, we're just all narrative nerds, and we're diving into IP and we're rolling around in it. We're swimming in it. And we figure out a game backwards. We never had a game mechanic. And then we're like, well, how do we fit the IP on this? That's just never happened. Right. And to stay with Back to the Future, for example, Brian Kirk, who was the game designer on that, you know, one of the things that in the game, one of the mechanics was you're trying to, it is the last 30 minutes of the first film, and you're trying to get George and Lorraine to fall in love. You're trying to get these pieces for the DeLorean. You're trying to get it set up. You're trying to avoid the bullies. You're trying to avoid the principal. Trying to get it set up, the DeLorean, so it can be right there at the right time. And the way that you can fail is that there is the photo of Marty and his siblings, and it's cut up into 6 sections. This was Brian's idea. And on one side, it is the full thing. But if certain things happen, we'll flip it over, and then that part's starting to disappear, right? I thought that was brilliant. You know why that's brilliant? That was the measure of success in the movie. Like, that's not even an abstraction. That's not even a mechanic. Right. Like, that literally is what happened in the film. Like, we know if we're failing or if we're doing it, because sometimes it would flip back. Like, oh, good. I was like, wow, that's so obvious. But again, there's been a lot of games for Back to the Future. You don't see that. So, and that even seems simple, but I thought that was a brilliant call. But for all of these, we're thinking like, what is the movie? What's happening in the movie? And let's figure out the mechanics backwards from it. You know, we didn't do label slap. We did have a Blue Sky section that was happening. It was 2 people devoted to Blue Sky ideas, but they were doing unlicensed games and doing over there. We worked backwards out of the IP.
That's wild.
Yeah, I think that like, and I mean, I can go on and on about our design process, and maybe I will. But I think that's something that's like, so there's 2 things I want to say about our philosophy in general. A lot of people ask kind of like what was the secret sauce, and I've thought a lot about, you know, my time at Force Present Creative, Funko Games, Prospero Hall, whatever you want to call it. To me, it's all the same. And ultimately, it comes from the fact that like our backgrounds are really varied, and you know, this is a studio that was founded by someone who was like who was an experienced designer who, you know, wanted to be an Imagineer, a filmmaker, and a musician. And they got into experience design, and they opened a restaurant that was an experience-based restaurant, and they wanted to see kind of what made people tick. And then they transferred that into Cranium. They're like, well, we can make games too. We can kind of make experience in boxes, and they go all the way through. You know, Korby's background is a musician. My background, I went to film school. You know, and so there's a really interesting book called Range by a fellow named David Epstein, and it talks about how generalists can kind of help solve a lot of these like creative problems. And I think that's something that's really like, it's hard to replicate that unless you go in with that philosophy, where it's like part of the reason why we were so ultra collaborative is because we really valued everyone's perspectives, because a filmmaker is going to think about a process of how to deconstruct an IP differently than a musician will, and and a lot differently than a game designer will, right? And so it's all of these different interests, different things, and it's looking at things as sort of these challenges, but looking through different lenses. And the reason I wanted to kind of piggyback off of the Back to the Future example is when I did Goonies. Goonies was a game that I was the lead design on, and we can talk about what that means at our studio, because it's not maybe not what people think it is in terms of the hobby world and what you know about game design, but I was the lead game designer on Goonies, and we talked also about the philosophy of Goonies, and you know, the creative director was really like, he's like, Goonies is a movie about the loss of friendships. It's about these kids who are not going to see each other again because like they grew up and their little town is being, you know, developed, and it's about the parents struggling financially and so all these things. And I'm like, you're coming at it from that perspective because you're a parent who, you know, has a child who's growing, is in at that developmental stage. Your perspective isn't wrong, you know. But I was like, Jay, for me, Goonies is about, I can go into the woods behind my house and maybe there's some pirate treasure there. Because when I was that was the age I was at when I saw Goonies, and we experienced it differently. And so with Goonies, I actually designed the whole first sort of pass of that game, and I refused to watch the movie again. I designed it all from what I remember and was nostalgic about for Goonies. Obviously, we went back and we checked our sources and we did all the work. And the producer was very much not. He was watching the film and getting all the quotes and all that stuff. But I was like, I want to like make the game that I imagine, you know, that these kids would imagine if they were playing games. That's why we sort of had it with this. We blended it kind of with this Hero Quest style, right? Like Goonies, like from a design perspective, I was like, I want to make Hero Quest, but I want to modernize it. I want to make the character of Zardon fun to play, not just someone who's there to like enforce the rules, you know?
Right.
And I don't want people to bash me because of Hero Quest. I love Hero Quest, obviously.
I love Hero Quest. I've played it so much in the 90s.
Right. But I think that modern sensibilities coming in, and it's like, what would happen if we designed it now? And so there's a lot of really cool mechanical innovations, but it all came from this idea of wanting to make something that would felt nostalgic and felt like it just fits in that universe. And then there's a spoiler here for people who play Goonies. Goonies is a campaign-based game with 9 scenarios and the 9 missions in the base box. The first 3 of them are their film. The next 6 are ones we made up.
Nice.
And we made them up because it was like, well, what's the story? And I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a whole narrative reason for this is happening. But I was like, that to me was like really audacious. And that's another example of where Prospero Hall, I think, was different, because it's like we made the movie, but then we also went further than that. Why? Because we thought it was cool and we thought that it was interesting, and we had a great partner and licensing partner that allowed us to do that. And so we just thought about things differently, I think, than a lot of folks do. And we realized that, like, you know, designing licensed games is a challenge, and it requires it's an art. It's not something where you can just go through this formulaic structure. You can do Back to the Future, where you watch it a trillion times and really dissect it scene by scene. You can do Goonies, where we have a sort of philosophical conversation about how adults and children view it differently. And then I can go and make a draft of it without ever watching the movie, just to kind of get my first thoughts out on paper.
Yeah.
It's a different method, you know. Monster Crunch cereal. It's a very simple sort of card game based on Monster Crunch. Obviously, it's not like super in depth because there's not a ton of, you know, world and universe building around the monsters.
Right.
But I was like, okay, well, this is a nostalgic cereal. What are the types of games I played when I was a kid with my grandparents? Let me make that style of game. That was like the connection that I made. And I was like, I want this to feel like a game that you would have played back in the 50s with your parents, you know, or 60s or 70s, whenever these commercials were airing, you know. So again, there's an artistry to it. I'm super passionate about it. And you're exactly right, Tim, in the sense that I always viewed these as a sort of Trojan horse into the hobby, where it's like, please just try the game. You who knows, you might like it. And then let's go from there.
I have so many games in my collection that are just for that. Like, you know, you go and where there's not going to be a ton of hardcore hobby gamers, and it's like, you know what, I got these, we're going to sit down, we're all going to have a really good time, and then maybe they're going to want to play something else, you know, like maybe one step in, you know, but you got to open the door, you got to get them in. And I guess what's fascinating to me, and I think Korby had said it earlier, is like, used to dodge the IP games. Any game based on IP, you're like, oh. And if it's something that you're passionate about, it's really a double-edged sword, because if it's a disappointment, it hurts that much more, you know, versus, oh no, like, this is damn good. I mean, it's why, I mean, it's sort of like the joke about, like, people my age don't like the prequels of Star Wars because we like Star Wars, you know, and then the people that grew up with the prequels first, those are their movies, you know. You can have whatever, you know, but it's going to, it all just depends on how it hits you. But then again, the way you guys, it sounds like, and from what the few that I played, the handful of them that I played, is the you guys really paid attention though to the spirit of the game. You know, like Jaws, I'll just keep going back to Jaws because that's probably the one I played the most, because when I got it, I was very excited about it. And then I had people keep asking to play it with me, family members and stuff, because they knew the movie. It was an in, you know, and there's that tension, you know, like, well, we're trying to find them. And then that second half of the game where it's the boat and you're just like, everybody's so stressed out except for Jaws, who is usually my brother-in-law, and he's just cackling, having the best time as he's ripping the boat to shreds.
Everyone wants to fight over playing the shark.
Yeah.
In that game.
And it's so good. I mean, just to anytime that you can create a board game that has people want to sit down and talk about what just happened when it's done. Hell yeah, man. Like that's the best, you know, like everybody sits down for the debrief, you know, you're like, woo, you know, it's like walking out of a really good movie that you were just excited you saw, you know,
yeah, it's arrogant to say, but I feel like one of the characteristics of that time was like, good luck making a better Jaws game.
Oh, sure.
Like,
I agree.
Like good luck making a better Goonies game. Like it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a very arrogant statement. It's like, we can make more Goonies. And by the way, the people that own Goonies, like, no, Korby, wait till I want to make more. But I'm like, come on, man. Like, didn't we just do it? It's like, at least I just say that's now, whether that's true or not, of course, is, you know,
oh, sure.
But I'm just saying the feeling I had when we were done, like, that's the most complete statement on these IPs. Next order of business. You know, that was the feeling we were kind of trying to go for.
I think that it's interesting because I want to go back to what you said, Tim, about like it being a double-edged sword, because there is a lot of pressure, right? Like you're putting you're putting like an entire fan base, and you're just hoping that you get it right. And
you're the guy that designed that Goonies game. You ruined my childhood. You know,
I've seen a comment on the game that was like again, why are there animated skeletons in this game for Goonies?
Oh, sure.
Those aren't in the movie. It's like, yeah, dude, I've seen the movie. I know there's not animated skeletons there. Like we're making, like, we're trying to go beyond that. We're trying to push the boundaries of this universe and what it means to be a Goonie. And ultimately, again, there's sort of narrative reasons for it. But the thing that we have to do when we make these IP games is we have to choose what perspective of that IP we're going to take. Because it's like you have to have a point of view. You have to be saying something. Like with any piece of art, you have to be saying something, because you can't make a game that's going to be like check every box and it's like, okay, cool, this is like the perfect game, everyone's going to love it. Like, no, we're artists. Like, and that's how we went into these conversations. Like do I think that here's a great example is I was the lead designer on Jurassic Park Danger that we did for Ravensburger. It was one of the first signature games I got to make.
I got it right over there.
Yeah. It's one of the first signature games I got to make when I came onto the team. And I was like, okay, what is the Jurassic Park experience I want? And to me, I'm like, Jurassic Park isn't about building a park. It's not. It's about running from dinosaurs.
It is.
It's about putting yourself in the mindset of, it's like, if I was on that island, holy shit, what would I do? Like, this is terrifying. And I was like, so from turn one, the dinosaurs are attacking you. They can kill you. You can die. You have to swap out characters. Like all these things, it's making that experience. Now, a couple years later, there was Universal reached out to us and I said, hey, like, do you want to make another Jurassic Park game? And the creative director at the time came to the team and was like, guys, we did Jurassic Park Danger for Ravensburger. Like, do we want to make another Jurassic Park game? We can if we want to. Do we want to make one? Do we need to make one? And I was like, or do we think we nailed it? And that's when I was like, well, let me think about this. Well, another aspect of this franchise that people haven't seen, wouldn't it be crazy if we did a legacy game where you can play through the whole history of Jurassic Park and you build the park? So now we did the dinosaur running from dinosaurs game. Now we can scratch the itch for people who are like following the whole franchise and want to make the whole thing, which ended up with Jurassic World Legacy, which Korby was the producer on, and that was a massive project, biggest project our studio ever did. But it was like, that was a kind of like audacious thinking where it was like, damn, like this sounds like an impossible task to do this. Let's try it. And that's what we went with. You know, like there was disagreements. There was a game, we did a Top Gun game, and there was a whole volleyball sequence. And we went, and there's actually happened to be a screening of Top Gun in the Seattle area while we were working that. So we all went as a studio, watched it like on the big screen, came back, we had all these conversations. And I personally was like, if it was me, if I was really like steering the ship, would I put the volleyball mini game in? Probably not. Because to me, I think it's like the different perspectives. The movie is a sort of campy romantic story. It's not really that much about dogfighting at all. There's like one dogfight scene in it.
Yeah. There's
But I was like, but my argument was like, people who remember it, who haven't seen the movie in 20 years, are going to expect dogfighting. And so we kind of compromised on it. But again, that's what you get when you have a studio that everyone is bringing their perspectives to the table. If I was a solo designer, would it have been that? No, hell no. It would have been totally different.
I also want to make up another point because, and by the way, I did Top Gun. I was a producer on it. You would think how we would assign people to games, and this was most of the time, who's the fan? Okay, we're going to do an ET game. All right, we look around. What producer, what game designer is like, oh my God, ET. All right, put them on it. Most of the time, that's the way it worked. But sometimes it's interesting to put somebody on it that doesn't know anything. I had never seen, I'm going to say it, I had never seen Top Gun, and I was assigned the game.
Nice.
And so what Chris is talking about, I thought that volleyball card game was hilarious.
Well, you go back and watch that volleyball scene now, and it is hilarious.
So, well, it is. I mean, it's what Chris brought up. And when you have 30, 40 years, I don't know how old it is, 40 years of removal of it. You know, like a lot of art, you put art in the world, you're an artist, you think, oh, this is X. You put it out in the world embraces it. And they were like, we love it because it's Y. And we're like, what? No, it's X. And they're like, no, it's Y. And it's like, you got to let it go. The other one was Fast and Furious. I was assigned the Fast and Furious Highway Heist, which is a physics simulator game. I had never seen a Fast and Furious game or a movie in my life. And I'm like, why are you giving it to me? You know, and I think it was given to me because the complexity of a physics simulator, we had never done that. I was always given the weird stuff at this company. Like if they didn't know how to, I was given our first legacy game, physics simulator. I did the choose your own adventure games, branching narrative, you know, the Bob Ross game. If it's weird, they were just like, well, give it to Korby, right? But I thought it's like interesting. I don't know. I'm not the holder of this. It is not in my heart, Fast and Furious. So then, of course, I watched it all. And I think it was interesting because you can also do that. And then someone's going to give a completely different perspective that knows nothing about it. And then now they're seeing it with X amount of years removed in history. And that's going to balance out with someone else that is the Uber fan. And they're going to bring something else too. So those combinations were happening too. I think that happened rarely, but sometimes I think that was played out. Let's get someone that knows nothing about it. And then they'll kind of bring the fresh perspective as well as like the Uber fan, right?
Well, and some of those IPs, they kind of exist in the zeitgeist. So you have like a perception without really knowing anything. And then, but then you do watch it and it's either, yep, this is what I thought it was, or no, or it's not. Fast and the Furious. I mean, that whole franchise started out as a completely different thing than what it is.
The way Fast and Furious hit me from the culture is like, this is everything wrong with American capitalism. It's chicks in bikinis, it's gas guzzling thing. Like, this is stupid. And then you're right. I watched the whole series, and then I think it's 4 or 5, and I'm like, wait, what? And it just it becomes this heist thing. I'm like, whoa! And I'm completely on board from then on. And but I didn't know that in the culture. That's not coming my way in the culture. Yeah, so it was a really interesting exercise. I kind of appreciated being given that one. I was kind of surprised. Like, why do you want me?
Fast and Furious is a great example of what we're talking about, where it's like trying to how do you distill all those films into one game when the films can't even they're not even in the same universe.
No, they can't even reconcile each other.
But I want to give a shout out because again, I think there's this element where while we were at Prospero, when we were doing the Prospero Hall stuff, when we were doing the Funko game stuff, when we were doing the 4% creative stuff, all these license things, there was this element, and I think this is another part of the secret sauce, for good or bad, is there was this kind of the element of a chip on our shoulder. Because we knew that we were making licensed games and we were doing our best to do it, but we knew that there was going to be some amount of people that just would ignore them, don't like them because they don't like the IP or whatever. And we knew that. So going into it.
Or actively disparage them. I mean, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, right? Totally. And again, I will be the first to admit that not every game that we made hit it out of the park every time. But people who were trying. So but I want to talk about like this philosophy of like trying to do the definitive game and kind of doing the one that where you think it's like Korby phrased it as kind of like good luck trying to do a different version. It's like that was the mindset where it's like we have to go in here and we know that we have to prove to people that like that this is like we're kind of battling uphill in some ways, that this is going to be better than their expectations. I want to give a shout out because again we're talking about different perspectives, right? Korby was the producer, Brian was the lead designer, but we all kind of worked on the Back to the Future game that we did as part of Funko Games simultaneously. Unfortunately, because of some licensing issues, my friend Scott Rogers was making a Back to the Future game for Ravensburger.
I like Scott Rogers' games a lot.
Yeah, no,
he's a great designer.
He's a great dude. In fact, actually, this is a little inside baseball. Tonight, I'm actually playing a role-playing game with him online. So
he'll be on our show May 22nd. I'm very excited about it. Yeah, or 21st, something like that. Whatever Wednesday that is. Yeah, I know him because of Chainsaw and Alien and some of his other stuff. Yeah, but yeah, please continue.
Oh my God, yeah. Chainsaw.
I love his Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Another one that we happened to unfortunately cross wires on. I'm sorry. It's Chris Leader was the. I'm sorry. I'm talking about Scott Rogers, but for Texas Chainsaw, Chris Leader was the designer and I think Ken Franklin were the designers of the other Back to the Future game. But let's just say that game also has a perspective, and that game gives fans who want to play a Back to the Future game about time travel that experience.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't. So there's an element of like, well, are people going to expect time travel and Back to the Future? Hell yes, they are. Are we going to put one out without it anyway? Hell yes.
Yeah. Is his the one with all the cards? Is his more cards? I have his. By the
way, I want to add something to this because it's funny you brought that up, Chris, because that was on my mind too. Because this is a weird part of my career. We originally started that game, and it's true. We were like, we're going to do the obvious ambition, which is to say we're going to do a game that encompasses all three, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which in retrospect, I think is sort of an easy way to be like, we're going to be ambitious, right? We're going to do it. We figured out a game. It was actually kind of interesting. It had a modular game board that flipped open the different time stratas that you may or may not get to. I kind of liked it, but I mean, we're like maybe 4 months into the cycle. No, less than that. It was like 3 months. It's working. It's a working game.
Mm-hmm.
And I just looked at my team and I'm like, is this it? It's like, man, and we're 3 months in and we're all like, we're just not feeling it, man. It works, but it's like, is this the one I want to put out to the world? You know? And I had a conversation with my boss. The only time I ever had this. And I was like, Jay, this works and it's not the one. It's just not the one. I know it in my heart. This is not the one. And I'm like, can you give me 2 weeks to figure out what we really want to do? And actually, I got the best response. He was like, man, you and Brian was the lead design. That's fine. He's like, you and Brian have hit it out the park at this point in time. If you're not feeling it, I trust you guys. You guys have so many successes. Take the time you need. And I was like, whoa, you know. And so we did take 2 weeks, and then we figured out this game, which Chris brought out a really good point. We have a Back to the Future game where you don't go back into the future.
Right.
And then it came out, and it got, you know, I have so many games that on Dice Tower have seal of approval. That is the only one where I got the seal of excellence.
Oh, hey, congrats.
And it got so many great reviews, and it is strange. We do not go back in time. And people point that on the reviews, and like, it doesn't matter, man. They nailed it. And I have to correct myself too. Bob Gale was the co-screenwriter along with Robert Zemeckis. And I also want to bring him up because we got a handwritten letter from Bob Gale who said, whoa, you guys nailed it. He's like, there's a lot of games for Back to the Future, but you guys nailed this one. And we're like, whoa, that's like a career highlight. I don't know where that letter is. I wish I had a copy.
That's like New Line Studios, Bob Gale, right? I mean, he was behind a bunch of
other stuff.
Big 80s projects.
I think he sent one of those letters. I was
about to say maybe he sends it to everyone else, but I don't know that. So let me enjoy this moment.
No, I think but it's a testament though. Like it's again, like the reason I'm bringing up, and I just double checked it. It was Ken Franklin and Chris Leader were the designers of the other Back to the Future game. Chris. I know Chris. He's like I've seen him at conventions and stuff, and he's a good dude. But I just bring this up because again, we're talking about IP games, and I think there's this philosophy where it's like people think that it's somehow easier, or like it's a simpler process, but it's not. It's just as much of an art form. In some ways it's more difficult, because you have to take something that people already have an opinion about, and you have to meet them where their opinion is on it. And so, like I said, I like our Back to the Future game. It's a bummer that it came out at the same time as the other one. You know, it's an unfortunate part of the license business, is that sometimes you're not aware of these types of overlaps. And the Scott Rogers one was on my mind, because that happened again on Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
And it was like the same thing, where it's like, it's really annoying that it turned out that way. It's really frustrating, obviously. But I love Scott. I think his game is cool. I think our game is cool. They're very kind of different vibes, different tones. But there's an artistry to it, you know. It's something where having done it all, having designed unlicensed games, having designed licensed games, like, let me tell you that designing unlicensed games is a nice reprieve from having to struggle to design the
for sure, because you've got to, I don't want to say shoehorn, but you definitely have these parameters built very strongly, you know. And if you're going to bend them, how do you do it in a way that makes sense? Sort of like the Goonies with adding on extra, you know, stuff. But again, it has to make sense. Did you go to the Goonies 2 video Nintendo game for
there? we put mermaids in
there we go.
as a nod to it. Like we added some mermaids.
Could I answer this question that just came up?
Yeah, please do.
If you could do any IP, no strings attached, money not an issue, what would you choose? I got a few responses. Right off the bat, Repo Man. Big fan.
Love that movie.
By the way, it's just waiting for a game. I mean, it's so easy to figure out a game right off the top of my head. There's 17 different ways, but it's waiting for it. Big Lebowski would be great. And I have a weird one. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting an idea out there, but the music video for Total Eclipse of the Heart.
Yeah.
By Bonnie Tyler. I don't know what's happening, but you have to be able to figure out again. I don't know. Are we trying to go through the other side? Is she this witch mother that has to collect the souls of the child? I think there's a game there. And that will sell 2.
Yeah.
That will sell to 2 of my
amazing.
friends, and that's about it. But I've always wanted to make a game out of that video. I think that might be a great idea just for a series, like just games made of classic music videos. And I've just put that out on the internet.
Man, some 80s music videos, there would be
rich narratives happening.
So much potential.
Happening.
Yeah.
How about you, Chris? Is there a...
I mean, for me, so here's something weird, and I've answered this question before. I mean, my biggest sort of IPs that I was a fan of growing up, I mean, I've already got a chance to do. Like, you know, I did all the Funkoverse sets, or I was the lead on all the Funkoverse sets. Does a lot of IPs in Funkoverse.
Yeah.
You know, Goonies, obviously Jurassic Park was like my favorite movie of all time for a long time. There's a couple here and there, but like, I've always answered this as I'm very comfortable at this point making games for other people and making games that people want to see. You know, that said, there's probably some like graphic novels that I would be interested in exploring.
Oh, sure.
The thing that really gets me kind of excited about IP stuff, and I'm going to compare it to Mad Max because it's top of mind because I just saw some of the newer trailers for the film.
I just rewatched Mad Max, getting ready for the new one. I'm excited.
Yeah. So I'm really excited. Like, to me, what would be really exciting, and we kind of did it with Goonies, is I'm excited. I would be excited to explore IPs, but like build out the world a bit. And Mad Max I bring that up as an example of, because it's like that Fury Road is the type of movie where it's like, man, they don't tell you, they show you the world. They don't tell you anything about the world, but
nothing.
Man, you want to know about that world. You want to know what's going on. And that to me is a very intriguing approach. Again, it's something where it's like, for me, I just think of licensed games like differently. You know, I've done the ones that are true to the source material. I've done the ones where we got to write a whole bunch of new content for that was outside the source material. You know, I've experienced it all. You know, and for me, I think that's something where I would love to be able to like work with a creator, you know, a comic book creator, for example, and build out their world and explore things that you haven't seen in the comics but exist in that universe. That would be fun to me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's this element of like, I'm really into the notion of, and this is something that I've talked a lot about when I was at Prospero Hall, when I was, getting excited about licenses. I'll use Pan Am as an example. When we were doing at Funko Games, is there's this whole other aspect of games that are licensed but don't necessarily feel licensed. Like it's like, because for me, like I want someone to be able to play Pan Am and they don't know anything about the history of Pan Am, but like they love the game and they're interested about it. We had that with Rear Window, where we had a lot of comments on Rear Window, where people hadn't seen the Hitchcock film, didn't know what it was about, and they played the game and they're like, oh, and then my kids wanted to watch it that weekend and we watched it. It's like that to me is interesting too. This idea of like licenses as sort of a vehicle for theme and narrative.
Yeah, it's interesting that it can work both ways, right? The movie or the TV show can guide you into the game, but then the game could also steer you the other way. I want to know, and I'm really disappointed that you guys never made a RoboCop game, and I want to know why I don't have a game for RoboCop. I didn't know I needed a Repo Man board game until Korby just said it, because I was the weird kid like watching those kind of movies in the 80s, but I have a sister that's like 9 years older than me, so she babysat me and I watched what she watched. And Repo Man was definitely on that playlist, but RoboCop, like as a kid, was like one of my all-time favorite movies.
Funny, I don't think RoboCop ever came up. We
Man.
It must have come up at some point.
Yeah, it must have. We always had lists of licenses, but we always had also just lists of titles of games, which was kind of fun. And sometimes those titles would sit around for years and then eventually become, because I mean, we did do unlicensed games too. I mean, Catlantis was a title that Jessica Assetti had on just Basecamp.
Oh, okay.
And it sat there for 2 years. And I was just looking and scrolling, and I saw that. I was like, Catlantis. And I made a post, and I said, how come we're not making a game called Catlantis right now? What are we doing? Drop everything, let's do Catlantis. And then we did. It was just because I brought that up. I didn't do it. Someone else did it. But we would have names that just sit around. And, we had unlicensed games. Drinking with Lincoln. Donner Dinner Party.
Yeah, Donner Dinner Party. Somebody mentioned that in the...
How to Rob a Bank. These are all games that you can buy right now. And they just started out as titles that we were just trying to make ourselves laugh. We would have meetings where it's just like, bring 20 titles that are ridiculous. And we bring those in, and those will become games. So, yeah, we had a lot of things sitting around. And then we would have lists of licenses, and we'd talk about those too. And some would come and some would go. And I think the downside of some of this, I mean, a couple of things, it was a great time. And it's, it's exciting talking about it again. But Chris said something earlier that made me think about things too. The two things I would say is that, I mean, sometimes we don't know what the cultural cachet of things are. So, I mean, I know you're a Jaws fan, and so it's hard to believe this, but as we were working on Jaws, I was like, do people care about Jaws in the 21st century?
Sure.
I don't even know. Now I found out I'm completely wrong. And then I think the only one I really knew was like Bob Ross. I'm like, oh no, 100%. That's the only one that I totally knew. The other thing I would say about these is because we would work from the IP backwards, and we're working from the story backwards. And because all of these things are bespoke, I'm used to I reinvent the wheel with every game. Like I'm just always starting from scratch. And that appeals to my personality because I'm one of those people. Like whenever I go to a restaurant in town, I always have to get something new off the menu. I'm not like, I just get my favorite all the time. But I will say sometimes I thought about that. Like we're creating all of these game systems and then we're not using them again. We're generating a lot, and to make these things really good, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. It's not like, we're not doing magic over here where we make a system and then we can sort of evolve it over time and things like that. It's like, no. And sometimes you can take things and use elements elsewhere. They can be inspired by other things, but it did dawn on me, we're making a lot of just original engines that are so bespoke to the IP that it's.
Well, I mean, that was an interesting thing, is that there was that so many of those games, you crack them open and it's not just the same game with a different skin. You know what I mean? Everything felt very different, and very, very thematic and stuff. So it was really interesting how y'all were able to pull that off. But again, I think it's a testament to the way you described it, right? The process, the design team, all the different perspectives that are brought to the table, and contributing. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's definitely some through lines. You can tell that as there are elements that I think are Prospero Hall signatures that happen just because it's that's sort of in the water back at our studio, some philosophies and ways that we go about doing things. But generally, yeah, it was a lot of kind of coming at things from different angles. I mean, it was something we prided ourselves on, is that, like, you know, we weren't going to just slap a license on something. And ultimately, just so you know, so you guys know, most licensors prefer that you don't do that. You know, they want there to be a cool game based off of their thing. You know, it's like, but they're not going to turn down Hasbro when Hasbro's like, you want to do Monopoly, because they know it's going to be a pretty good check, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, so there's a push and pull for sure. I mean, like and this is maybe a good transition to talk about the Funko Games transition. You know, so we were FPC, we were working for a lot of different clients, and at some point we reached out to Funko and we said, hey, have you guys thought about making a board game? You should make a board game, and you should let us make it for you, because we were, you know, mercenaries at this point. We're looking for clients anywhere, you know. And so I started working on this Funkoverse for Funko, and it was like, they're like, Chris, we're gonna have you lead this project, you know. And I was like, cool, this sounds like the opportunity. I've been a miniatures game player my whole life. I want to make a miniatures game. That sounds awesome. Let me do that. And so I got to make a miniatures game, and I'm really proud of. I have a tattoo of the components on me. It's something that it's one of my biggest achievements as a designer. It was a chance to work on a miniatures game that I'm really proud of. And while we're kind of working with Funko on this, as they're a client of ours, that's when the discussions sort of started to take place, where it's like, oh, well, Funko's like, okay, well, if we're gonna make board games, we should really get into this. We should make a board game division. And they ended up acquiring Forest Brazilian Creative, who we were all working there at the time, to basically become their board game division. And so that's how sort of that came to pass. You know, it's a lot of folks sort of get the timeline a little bit confused, and they're like, oh, Funko bought Forest Brazilian Creative. They had them make Funkoverse like as their first thing. No, we were working on Funkoverse before we were even part of Funko.
That was the bridge. That was the bridge.
Yeah, I would go up to Funko headquarters every couple of weeks and show them the progress on the game, and we were working with them as partners on that. And then it became sort of open. And I will say that, you know, as far as I'm aware, you know, when Funko acquired our studio, they let us do our own thing, and they were never really like, oh, do this. They're like, you guys know games, you do what you do, you know. And so that was a really kind of fortuitous moment. The acquisition happened right before the real sort of shutdown era of the pandemic, which was unfortunate. I was really bummed that this game that we were working on like an organized play and system and stuff for Funkoverse, and it was like, oh nope, sorry, everyone's quarantined.
Yeah, nobody's getting together to play anything organized. Yeah.
So the timing wasn't great, but it was a system that I'm really proud of. You know, and so that kind of led into that era. But as you see, when we went to Funko, it was a lot more of what we were kind of doing, which is we were still doing the Prospero Hall stuff, also doing the unlicensed other stuff. One thing that we talked about a little bit, and I'd love to get into it, because Mike's kind of just been like here, kind of just like shepherding the conversation of it, kind of overseeing everything. But Mike was talking before we got on the call about sort of the studio and crediting and how, like, who made what when it came to the Prospero Hall model. So one thing that I want to point out when it comes to Prospero Hall, as sort of a preface to this conversation, is Prospero Hall was a pen name that was created to attach to some products, and it was almost like a brand identity. We're like, okay, we're making these sort of signature strategy, like lightweight, middleweight games. A lot of these games generally have like a designer attached to them. What's sort of like this sort of pseudo imprint that we can create to let people know that this is from our studio, but it's like a different type of game. And that's where Prospero Hall sort of came from. So one of the things that's important to know about Prospero Hall, though, that's what a lot of your audience, a lot of people know us from. But Korby says this story all the time. Prospero Hall wasn't paying our health insurance, and it wasn't paying our salaries. Surprise slides, matching games, family party games. Like those were like the real money maker. Villainous obviously was a very big hit.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So we have a lot of Prospero Hall, a lot of Prospero Hall games that have done very well, but the studio wasn't really built on that. That by far wasn't our the extent of our output, and that's something that I think I just like to talk about a little bit, because it factors into why there were some of us at the studio who were uncomfortable being credited on certain games in some ways. It wasn't sort of maybe like a unified feeling, but there was this element where there was a lot of stuff that wasn't Prospero Hall that sort of got wrapped up into the Prospero Hall banner. And I'm happy to kind of unpack and answer questions, and I know Korby has some perspective on it as well, having been there from the outset. He was there when they came up with the name Prospero Hall. I came in a week or two later, so after it. But anyway, so that's something to say about our studio. Is our studio just wasn't strategy games, just wasn't licensed games. There was a lot of other stuff that we did. Like I said, we were mercenaries. We were the studio who, if you were a publisher and you needed something done and everyone else was saying no, it's impossible, come to Forest Museum Creative, we'll say yes and we'll get it done. That's how they sort of like, that's how we put food on the table, is by being the people who, the Navy SEALs of game design, that we come in to solve the problems other people can't solve.
Now is that sort of where you're at with Tempest? What's the model with Tempest now, where you guys are now? Because I was not even aware. I mean, I just assumed, I don't know, that Funko had this stable of designers. Now my eyes are much more open, right, to the history, and I understand it a little bit better. But it's like, oh yeah, they got this stable of designers, and they're just cranking out these IP games, and it's like, oh, and actually, like, a lot of them are pretty damn good. Like, that's weird. But then when it was done, right, that seemed like a shock. Like, hey, they're closing it, and it's like, well, what happened? Because it seemed like they were doing well. But then you pop up now and you're like, hey, Tempest, this is what we're doing. So with Tempest Workshop, like, is this a similar kind of thing, except without the
kind of, yeah. I want to like give Korby a chance to talk about his view of it. But before we get into that, I do want to have one point of clarification, because it's, having been through this, the people involved here are my friends, my family, like, these are people that are near and dear to my heart. And I want to give one very clear point of clarification. It is that Goliath, to tell people who don't know the story, Goliath acquired Funko Games from Funko. Funko was, obviously they're at a point where they were financially, they were trying to condense and kind of stick to their core stuff. They sold the studio the assets of the studio to Goliath, which included all this back catalog of like 20 years of game inventions, right? Like, that's part of this whole deal. Goliath took on 5 of the employees. We had about 30 employees. Goliath took on 5 of those folks over. Also, got the rights to all the Prospero Hall stuff, all the Funko game stuff, all that stuff, right? And like Matt, one of my best friends, he was the producer on a lot of Prospero Hall stuff. Me and him were the two that held hands and made Goonies, right? Which I think, like, Goonies is as Prospero Hall as it gets, in my opinion, right? He's over at Goliath now. And there are people that came from our team that we really wish, truly, and I'm not just blowing smoke, we really, truly wish that they have a lot of success over at Goliath. We have no hard feelings towards. I
mean, at the end of the day, it's a business. I mean, of course. Right?
But I want to make it very clear, because I made a very heartfelt post about Prospero Hall, and sort of because to me, Prospero Hall was this big umbrella term for what I considered the studio. And for me, Prospero Hall wasn't just the people that even worked on the Prospero Hall games. It was the people who helped manage the office. It was the people who did the graphic design for games that never had Prospero Hall on their boxes at all. It was the sales team. It was the people who were doing licensing and talking to licensors and people who were talking to factories, like, all these things, right? For me, that part of what our studio was came to an end. But that isn't to say, and I say this because I've had conversations with some of the folks that are over at Goliath, and in some of what I said, I think it was hurtful. I think to them a little bit, to that I would suggest that like, oh well, like you said Prospero Hall is gone. What am I, chopped liver? Like that, and that wasn't my intent, and that's not, I think, the narrative that I think people should really be pushing. There was something that happened. It was a business thing that happened, and from that, I was in the lucky position as I was game development team lead at Prospero Hall and Funko Games. I had some people reach out to me, different publishers, different entities reach out to me and said, hey, like, what's going on? They were, like you, Tim, you reached out to me like, hey, what's going on? These people did the same thing. And through that, I saw an opportunity to be like, oh, there's people that are actually interested in some of our services that we used to provide for other publishers. Let's kind of get some of the crew back together and kind of bootstrap this new studio and see what we can do. And with the mindset of going back to what was Forest Brazilian Creative, which we're not publishers, we're game inventors. And if you have a task that's a challenge, we have a team of people, whether it's the three founders, myself, Korby, or Isaiah, or this group of contractors who have graciously agreed to do contract work for us. They're not employees, but they are people who we've worked with that we trust and that have agreed to do work with us. We can help solve those problems because we're a very good team. We know how to work well together. Another like third of the studio went and got jobs immediately with other places.
Oh, sure.
So it's like, so that to me is it's very difficult. And this is kind of like the downside to this. Like for all of the things that I loved about the philosophy of like, we're all in this together and we're all in this big name, there is a logistical challenge when things eventually run their course about how to sort of describe this. And so I try to be as open as I can about that, but like, I really deeply care about our legacy as a studio. I'm super proud of what we created. I'm looking forward to seeing what people make at Goliath or Ravensburger or Moose or wherever they end up. Like I love these people who worked on these things that I went shoulder to shoulder with.
Yeah.
I think changed the landscape of the board game aisle with. And Tempest is part of that, where we're also going to get a chance to sort of put our stake in the ground and say, hey, there's some of us, and this is some stuff that we want to do and we're interested in doing. And so right now, you catch us at a weird time where we are working with a couple different publishers on some different ideas and concepts. The core philosophy of what Tempest is and how it's different is that we really see an opportunity in direct-to-consumer crowdfunding models of releasing games, of reaching out to people directly. We can do the mass market stuff. We have a track record. There's probably not a lot of people in the world, studios in the world, who have as much experience.
I mean, Eric Lang is dying to get into mass market. I mean, he's trying to do that right now. I mean, I play. I'm not good friends with Eric. I know him, and yeah, I'd love to like welcome to the cause. Like, please, we need more people to push this, and so we're going to be doing that as Tempest Workshop. But I think the other thing that you have to remember, and this is also true for Prospero Hall, is that we're going to surprise you. And we're not going to always do the things that you expect us to do. We're going to make the Back to the Future game without time travel. We're going to make a design studio that's a little bit different than the way other design studios used to work. That's just the way we think. And we're really trying to think of this new era, because there's a lot of challenges with mass market. And and like I said, there's a lot of benefits. The challenge with mass market, and this is another thing that people might not be aware of really, is just imagine that you make a product, right? And let's say you go on Amazon or you go on Kickstarter, and you can advertise your product to the whole world, and anyone that wants to buy your product can buy your product. Well, that's great. You can make a business out of that, right? Well, with mass market, you're really appealing to three people: whoever happens to be the buyer at Target, whoever happens to be the buyer at Walmart, and whoever happens to be the buyer at Amazon 1P, which is the Amazon first party, right? These three people who are very good at what they do, and know their audiences. But ultimately, if these three people don't like your thing, then it doesn't get made. Right.
Whereas if you go to direct to consumer, you go to a different type of philosophy. Even if you go to hobby, which we had a lot of trouble really cracking into hobby, because I think, hobby obviously has a lot of, I come from, like I said, my background is in FLGSs and stuff. There's a lot of like, well, why are we going to buy your game when I can buy it at Target? And there's a very good chance that Target, slashes prices on it next month. And, it's hard to compete with. Like, I totally get that struggle, right? But even hobby, you have a much broader range of who you can appeal to. And so for Tempest Workshop, who is reestablishing themselves and getting back into this mindset, like, our focus isn't on mass market. Now, that being said, we are working with publishers who do work in the mass market, and we are going to be making products for them. And we are going to be doing that because we're very good at doing that, but it's not our sole focus. And so I don't want people to think that like, oh, this is Prospero Hall 2.0, or this is Funko Games 2.0. It's not. We have some other things in the pipeline, other things on the burners that we're really excited about exploring. And so we're going to be doing a lot of different things. And in some ways we're doing it for us. And so, the same mentality that went into, oh, imagine what if we did this, wouldn't this be wild? Those are also the experiences that we're going to try to create and build space for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tim, we the phrase will come up a lot in meetings where we're like, well, what does it look like to be a 21st century design firm for tabletop, right? Mm-hmm. And yes, we came from this wonderful place and we have this shared DNA, but we're open to this becoming whatever it's going to become. I mean, I don't think that we need it to be defined as X, Y, or Z. I mean, there's things that we're interested in that we're not seeing anyone else go into. So it's like, yeah, let's explore that. I don't think that we need to say that we're going to be doing licensed IP for the mass market. I mean, like, we have that muscle, but it's like, we don't have to limit ourselves to that. It's interesting because there's so many business opportunities we want to talk about that we just can't right now.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah,
they're really fascinating.
I totally get that.
They are not traditional, and they are not what you would expect. And it's kind of like, it's funny. I was talking to Chris about this. Like, there's almost a meta game to the business end of it. It's funny how there's this split between the creative and the business. Like, I'm a game designer. I didn't get into games to do business, but it's like, but doing the business thing kind of is a game. Like, there's sort of a fun element to like figuring out how to game this thing and how to figure out seeing things that no one else saw and how can we work this. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I would love to talk about right now, but I just know that we can't. But we're doing.
We'll just have to have you on again when you can talk about it.
Yeah.
So, I just want to say, as a gamer, you guys talked about shattering expectations, and if you go back to like the very beginning when Funko / Prospero Hall is making games, I think if there's always that skeptic or troll, if you want to call them that, that looked at some of those IPs and would go, oh, these are probably all cash grabs, right? But then anybody that has played those games, I just want to verify, you guys shattered expectations with those games. There's no question anybody that plays those games know how good they are, even gamers, not just the troll or the casual gamer. You succeeded in getting hardcore gamers to play like games with these huge IPs, which like before that, I don't think there were a lot of good IP games. And so I think by doing so, you guys have very much verified what you're capable of doing.
I'm not blowing
all the
smoke,
games you've mentioned, I love.
I'm not blowing smoke, but I've got at least 10 of your titles on my. I'm like looking around. I was like, oh yeah, I've got that game. When Mike had the page up and you could see the game sort of in the background, it's like, oh, I've got that one. I've got that one. My in-laws have that one. And it's even better that my in-laws have it because they have a small collection of games and they're only into games because I'm into games, and I take them over at the holidays and stuff, and then when I go over we play games and stuff. But like, that is again the importance of what y'all did, so it's really, I was really excited honestly that that this was still going to be a thing, I guess, like these creative forces, were still all kind of happening, because it really sucks when you hear like, oh, this, they closed, IDW stopped making games. And it's like, man, they had some awesome IPs. I love those, and I always, you think about the human part of it too, right? Because I'm friends now with a bunch of designers and publishers and stuff. And it's like, well, now I'm just, back to the grind, trying to, get a game signed and, do this and pitch that. And so, you guys, it's really exciting because I just mentally, I just had to assume that you knew there was a market for what y'all did, and it makes sense that people are reaching out to you. Hey, what are you doing? Well, if you're not doing that now, what are you doing? And I know Goliath just bought Lucky Duck, and I hope that, I hope Lucky Duck keeps doing what they're doing, because it's a lot of great people over there. I mean, the industry as a whole. I mean, there's so many wonderful, amazing people. And for you guys, your experience is so unique because so many designers, it's just them and maybe the people they play test with, or, a few other designer friends that they bounce stuff off of. But I mean, it's a lot of proto spiels and, just going to the game stores and like, hey, break my game, right? Going to conventions. Hey, sitting in the unpub room, break my game. I was talking to Martin Wallace at Origins, and he spent almost all of his time in the unpub room just playing. Like, that's all he wanted to do. Like, he's like, yeah, I'll come over here and I'll take my award, that they gave him. And he was kind enough to come over and like sit in our booth at Origins and do an interview with me. And that was over the moon. I was so excited about that. But like, he couldn't wait to get back to the unpub room. He was hanging out there and doing that. And so for you guys though, you have such a unique, I don't know, way of doing it. I was not aware until talking to you guys, of even other sort of design houses, like it's,
not a lot,
and so kind of learning about that process and how that whole thing goes, is just really fascinating to me.
It is interesting too. I mean, Chris said something to this extent, or he said something about Prospero Hall sort of bigger than the people. It's true. Like when we were together, we all love and adore each other. We all did. It's true. We all hang out with each other. We all, it's one of my favorite game designers had a kid, it's like, we all know each other. And so, but you do want to sort of recognize that, all right, there's a spirit that comes from everybody coming together. But you want that to kind of live beyond the people, which is to say that you don't want this to be tied so much to a personality that if like 3 people get hit by a truck, then it's all over. Like, right. So we do get, at the risk of sounding a little woo and getting on like on a spiritual level, like there is this sort of vibe, and this is like you're carrying the torch, man, of this certain.
You got
spirit,
to,
and you want it. And by the way, and that spirit's going to evolve into other things too, and so it's something we try to be conscious of. It's funny how much the 3 of us will talk about games and the word spirit comes up or vibe comes up. Like, again, at the risk of sounding woo, it's like, I feel like we bring that up a lot. We're trying to be sensitive to that it's just not tied to one personality, but that we all experienced it and that it's our responsibility to carry that spirit on,
So like this, I don't know, weird question is, have you guys, so Korby, have you designed games solo, individually, independent of, okay. So have you ever felt like, oh, I need to go and do my own thing? Or do you scratch that itch when you're because you were exposed to such a variety of options?
I do both. I mean, my whole life have been highly collaborative. I'm an extrovert from Texas. So I'm used to like, give me 20 people in a room. I'm like, I'm fantastic. I'm like, I grew up, all my memories of when I was a kid are all of summer, and they're all of backyards and kids and dogs running around, a radio playing, and footballs thrown into the air. It's just like there's a certain level of chaos and like a mass of people. And I'm like, that's like a warm blanket to me. So it's just like, so I like collaboration. I find I'm very comfortable in that. But I absolutely have done games on my own. I'm always thinking about something. The last, so I was not let go from Funko. I left 2 years ago, actually. And I did Jurassic World, the Legacy game, which took 2 years. That's the longest, a little under 2 years, which is the biggest game that studio did by any metric, by the size of the box, the weight of the box, the price point, it was 19 people were on that project. It was huge. And I just finished it, and I was just like, where do I go from here? Like, this is kind of it. Like if this is a movie, it's like, shouldn't you leave, Korby? I mean, this is get out of the way. It's like, so I left. I didn't even have another job. I just like, it just felt like the end of the story, and anything else I did would be kind of strange. Let's end on this exclamation point. But for the last, like a little under 2 years, for 18 months, myself and Brian Kirk, I keep bringing him up. He was one of the villainous co-designers, Jaws designer, Back to the Future designer. We worked for someone, and it was just the 2 of us making games. But among that, so it's a very small shop. But among that time, there's a lot of games that just Brian's making solo, I'm making solo, and then we come together and we sort of and chisel them out. So yeah, I've done games on my own, and I always have. There's always something that I'm obsessed with in the back of my head that I'm doing. I'm a composer. I'm always writing music, or I always have some idea for, there's intentional communities are very interesting to me. I would like to figure one out that is for a $40,000 or less buy-in. Like there's always something that I'm obsessed on. So.
Sure. Yeah, I think of it like a band, right? Where you've got musicians and then everybody wants to go do a solo project, but then, but when they come back together, it's really nice. But, everybody, like the Beatles, they all start as one thing, but then all their tastes and their styles sort of evolve, and it doesn't always evolve in the same way, right? And they
I was thinking about this the other day, like with Talking Heads, which I love Talking Heads.
Oh my God, I love Talking Heads. Yeah.
Name a great David Byrne solo album.
No, I won't.
Nope.
I won't.
Meanwhile, those first 5 albums are classics, and it's okay, well, okay, there was something there about that chemistry,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
100%. I feel the same way about Roger Waters and Pink Floyd, but we could go on music like all day.
Yeah,
but yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
A whole different rundown.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I'm a nerd of all colors.
In the house.
Yeah, that's Evan Halbert.
Hey, Evan.
Hey.
Evan's in Portland. He's out your way, right, Chris? You're in Seattle?
Yeah, Seattle. Yeah.
I mean, it's close-ish. It's closer than Indiana. So as far as if it's a dartboard, you're real close. You're practically a bullseye.
All right. So let me tell you a quick story out of hitting it out of the park. Okay. So the Bob Ross Art of Skill game. All right. I think there's I didn't think it would be possible to make a Bob Ross game that would actually be good. Like I was like, there's no way this is good. But here's me, cheap board gamer, strolling through Goodwill, trying to find something, and I happened to stumble upon this game. Okay, it was completely untouched. Like the shrink were still on the cards, and I think somebody like bought that game, and it was more of a game than they were expecting. But then I swoop in and take this game, and I've taught this to I don't know how many people, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's set collecting in this game, and there's special powers. I'm like, this is a good game, but it's Bob Ross game, and like I've got my mom to play this game, and she enjoys it a lot. So like again, just taking a concept, they're like, there's no way this can be a good game, right? And then going, no, this is really fun.
Okay, I was a producer on that. Let me tell you about Bob Ross, because it's a pretty wild story. And so I was in the room with Jessica Setti, who is one of our biz dev people, and she turned around to me and she said, "Would you play a Bob Ross game?" And my actual response was, "Hell yes."
Hell yeah.
Because I was a fan in the 90s. My son was very small. I used to watch, my son was born in 90, and I used to watch it with him. And I was like,
wait,
really quick. Amazing.
Can I tell a really quick story about Bob Ross? Really quick, a little nostalgia. I was such a fan of Bob Ross. This is a true story. I was part of a Cub Scout group, and we had to give book reports, and we had to like go up and say, "Here's my favorite book." I literally brought Joy of Painting. I was like, "This is my favorite book." They're like, "There's not even." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." My mom just shook her head. She's like, "It really is. He loves the book." I don't know.
Well, so Jessica Hertz said, "Okay," and then she turned around and she got them on the phone, and she got a retainer for us to do a game for like $2,000. End scene. This was 5 minutes. The whole thing I just told you took 5 minutes. Like it will be in the screenplay, this scene.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. I was like impressed. Like she just did it. She didn't ask the people higher up. She was just like, she called him, got him on the phone. It's like $2,000. That's not a problem. I have no problem having to beg for forgiveness for that. And in all honesty, actually, there was resistance to do that game because it was seen as too weird. Now, we did. So a couple of things. We did concepting on that game, and you would be shocked to see all the different things that we did to get there. We went as wild. We had a whole thing where it was an adventure game inside Bob's head, and the board was his head in a fro, and you were going to all these. It was just like The Hobbit.
Nice.
We had a game that was his background being in the Air Force, like Bob Ross's backstory. Like we were all over the map. Right?
That's like that's your Back to the Future version. It's Bob Ross, but no painting.
We were all over the map. During this time, we did a lot of focus grouping. And it's funny, I was one of the few people outside of the two people that ran the studio. I would always show the focus grouping, even if it's not my games. I just found it fascinating. And because you think you know whatever, and then you show up and then here's some consumers and they're like, what? I had no idea people were thinking this way. Anyway, in this one, we're just showing slides of packages. We have no game, and just seeing what they say. And we'll show a slide of something, and they're like, so what do you think of this? Blah, blah, blah. What do you think of this? Blah, blah, blah. Then we showed a slide of Bob Ross. There's no game that exists. It is the cover that we have now. It's his head, it's his fro, and his fro are some of his paintings. Bob Ross, Art of Chill game. Okay, yes, there you go. Here's what happened. One man stood up out of his chair. You could stop right there. Nobody stands up out of the chair to fucking screw.
Right.
He stood up out of his chair, pointed at the screen. He said, I'll pay $50 for that. The guy next to him stood up and said, I'll pay $100. Then a third woman stood up and said, I just want to hug the box. And I'm like, who paid these people? By the way, if anyone paid these people, it probably would have been me to come in. It seemed so fake. But I'm glad because the two people that had resistance to it, like they were seeing this. And I'm like, yeah. I mentioned earlier, one of the things about working with licenses, like you just never know. You don't know if it's going to hit or not. You have an educated guess, but you're not sure. Bob Ross is the only one I was like, when Jessica said that, I'm like, nope, 100%. I don't care what we do, 100%. This is the only one I've ever felt that way. So anyway, eventually we're going around the horn and we're being way too ambitious. And our studio head's like, guys, come on. You got to reel it in.
So the thing about Bob Ross, that I immediately thought about playing this with my mom because she watched him all the time when I was a kid. And if you guys didn't know, the Joy of Painting was filmed at Ball State University, which is in Muncie, Indiana. Okay. It's about 2.5 hours from here and about 20 minutes from where my mom grew up. So like she always had that dude on the TV when I was a kid. And I still was like, there's actually a good Bob Ross game. I can't believe this. So
yeah, I mean, eventually
action selection and everything.
Yeah, eventually, I forget who said it, but somebody said it should just be like watching the show. And we're like, okay. So Brian took that and made this game where now, yeah, it's a competitive game, but Bob is there. There's an easel, there's a painting, and there's a Bob mover, and he's moving along, and he's sort of painting the game, and you're painting along with him, painting the thing. And it mirrored the show, and it's like, isn't that kind of what people want, Right. And then we all was like, this is actually a good game. And Brian and I would talk about this. It's like, man, come on. Like between you and me, like the game's like, wouldn't it be funny if the game was good? Like, and then and they're like, what? Like,
how subversive.
Nobody would see that coming.
That is so punk rock.
And so we're playing it. We're like, yeah, this is pretty good. So Target, I don't know if you guys know the numbers, the way like it mass, like Target, and this was at the time, so I don't know if these numbers might've changed, but at the time, if they think the game will be okay, like the first initial buy-in, it'll be like 30K, maybe 40K nationwide. If they're like, we think this thing's going to do some movement, it's like 60K, right? Mm-hmm. They ordered 80K of Bob Ross.
Whoa.
We were like, what? Like, this is a record. Now, 2 weeks later, they turned around, unprompted, and said, no, we're doing 100K. And we're like, what? This is a record. And they were right. And it sold out. Now, Mike, to your point, I have been in many homes, and I'm very aware that people are just buying this game and giving it to friends as gifts. And I've been in homes where it's up in the shelf and it's shrink wrapped.
You know what, though? Who gives a shit? It's sold. I mean, that's the thing.
Well, yes and no. But that's my opportunity to say, hey, guys, you want to play that game? And sometimes I don't even say I had anything to do with it.
Yeah, just say, like, yeah, I know how to play that.
How to play it without reading the instructions. And then, because I know that's happening out there, and that's fine. It's funny because I dated someone 2 years after that came out, and then she's like, yeah, I bought that for my sister, and she hasn't played it yet. But it's sitting there. I don't mind. That's a long con. That's a long game. Like if somebody has it on their shelf and 5 years from now they get it out and they're like, wait a second, this is like, I'm not so mad by that. That's hilarious to me too. I love it. Yeah. And yeah, all the reviews were that like, this is a better game than it had a right to be. It didn't need to be this good. We got that in reviews all the time.
Now, who did the Kenny G one? Keeping it sexy. Because whoever named that game was brilliant.
I think that was Jessica Setti again.
That was absolutely brilliant. My in-laws have that game. I don't know if they've ever played it, but they have that game on their shelf. And I think they bought it just because they were like, oh my God, this is hilarious.
Yeah.
That's the one. You don't grow up through the 90s and not, have some sort of Kenny G, awareness. The only one you're missing now is like a Yanni and his wall of keyboards board game.
Yes.
Kenny G, I don't know who named it. I know that Stephanie Straw was the producer on it. She also did some of the game design as well. And then I want to say it was Nate Weissman.
I think you're right.
I think was the other person who was like primarily on it. Again, you know, like a lot of these projects, at that time, I think it was even more so that people would just be assigned different things. But I remember there's a great story with Stephanie where like, who's been in the industry for quite some time and as a content creator and developer, super talented person. And she was like, this is like one of the first games that my mom bought and was
nice.
Like, and she's like, when my mom bought this, she's like, honey, you've made it. Like you've made
nice.
So
that's wonderful.
The thing with that kind of stuff is, and I like to bring up the Kenny G story a lot because like, it's such a, it gets a lot of flack because it is so weird, you know, but like you cannot make that game unless you're earnestly trying to do the best job you can do.
Right.
You know? And that's something where it's like, you know, for Steph, she had that touchstone to her mom actually beat a real big fan of Kenny G. And it's like, yeah, you have to have someone, you have to respect it. You know, you have to go in and try to do it justice. And so, yeah, that was a good one. There are some other ones like I think Mr. Rogers was one that we always wanted to do.
Oh, right.
All the ones that we had.
Was there an IP that was floating around that you guys never did one on that you thought like, oh, it would have been great?
Oh,
like,
yeah. I mean, we can't get into obviously the details. That happens all the time though, you know, because it's like, because you can't get every IP, right? And like, you know, sometimes you reach out to someone and someone else has the rights to it, or
sure.
Out of the other, you know, there's some, you know, some folks, some licenses that we tried to get, where they're just like flat out like, no, we're not doing games. Like
that's crazy.
Like, okay, like that's, you know, that's respectable.
Wow.
You know, I think working with licensors is always a challenge. It's when new folks come in, and it depends on the licensor that you're working with. But we'd have a lot of new people who come in the studio and haven't really worked on licensed products before. And there's a lot of hand wringing and frustration because licensors have like, you know, sometimes have a lot of like kind of wild requests or certain parameters that they want, or might be have ideas that, you know, we as a studio disagree with. And there's times when we can push back on them, times when we can't. But, you know, our creative director at the time, Jay Wheatley, would just say, he's like, yeah, but like, there's a reason that we're going to them. Like they have the thing. We want to use their thing. It's their thing. Like,
right.
You know, and so you have to respect that, you know. And it's funny. I found it in my time, you know, having done a lot of, you know, Disney games, Marvel games, you know, DC comic stuff, the bigger the property, more often than not, the easier the licensor is to work with. And the reason is because they're used to it.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
When you go to someone who's like an independent studio or like they've never made a game before,
they're very precious, right?
They're like, well, we don't like, it's very, very different, you know. Like you go to working with, like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of particulars working with Star Wars and that kind of stuff too. But it's like the people you're dealing with like have made a lot of games and they know how it works, you know. And so yeah, it's not always the ones that you think are going to be the difficult ones or the difficult ones.
Yeah, it's really, it's just fascinating how all of that works and everything. Because again, we said it before, but you know, the licensed games, the IP games, usually the hit rate, you know, if we're going baseball, you're probably okay. You know, like you're batting 500, not bad. But like, I don't know. It was kind of crazy though, because of what you guys were doing. More often than not, like, oh, I can get this played again. And a lot of times I look at games like that. Like I'm a sort of a game omnivore. I came up playing Magic and Warhammer and role-playing games, like doing all that stuff, playing Hero Quest in the early 90s and playing Atmosphere or Nightmare is what it was called back then with the VHS, you know, and moving around the board, like loving that stuff. And then, so I was just sort of like all over the place with my game. Like, I just wanted to play games. I guess kind of like Korby. Like, I wanted to be in a group. I wanted to keep playing games. I wanted to, you know, like, what kind of game do you like? Yep, let's play it. I like that kind of game too. Even if I never played it, you know, let's go. But now it's so much more is now I'm trying to get other people. And Chris, you hit on that early, right? Like, I'm a huge advocate for just let's just play games. Let's talk. It's a wonderful way to get to meet people, get to know people.
Yep.
I think if I don't know Korby, but I don't like anybody from Texas. Everybody from Texas sucks. Well, it's like, well, I sit down across the table from Korby and we play games together. And it's like, oh, you're from Texas. You're pretty cool. You know, I mean, you know people from different lifestyles, different, you know, backgrounds, you know, and everything. And it's just such a wonderful way to bring people together. And in an IP game that's like good, you know, God forbid.
Yeah.
Even better.
I've always said that about poker. I don't take poker seriously.
Oh, sure.
I'm not good at it. I play it any chance I get. Best way to get to know anybody in the room. To me, it's just a vehicle. It's a vehicle to give shit to people. And sort of like, I just met you and I'm making fun of what you're putting down. It's just a way to get to know people. I don't care about winning, but
that's why I play like games like cockroach poker and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Or, you know, because it's that bluffing, it's that line, and then you kind of like can pull them out of their shell, right? You know what I mean? Get them to feel a little more comfortable and engage, you know, like a little bit more. And
I mean, that's one thing too, in the middle of the 21st century. It's funny, we're talking about, it's 2024 and we're talking about tabletop games.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I zoom out. It's like, what are these four people talking about tabletop games? But I think that's one thing that I'm really proud of. I mean, it's, you know, I live in King County in Seattle. There's so many jobs for AAA games here. There's just so much money. And I don't want to do it. And by the way, I came up in AAA games. I came up in PlayStation 2 games. And when Xbox came out, I did stuff for that. Yeah. I did mobile games for a while, but I like, just from the spiritual level, knowing that we're making something where people are sitting around a table and they're putting their phones down and they're looking at each other and they're banking off each other's vibe. Like, to me, that's important. And I'm not putting down video games or AAA games or anything like that, or mobile games, but I just like knowing that that's what we're making. That just feels good.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, there's room for all of those in my life, and I do all those things.
Totally.
I got a PlayStation 5 upstairs. I play it when I'm not doing board game stuff, you know, but like board games, I mean, I get my kids to, we sit down and we play board games, you know, my wife is definitely not the gamer that I am, but if I can get her to sit down and play a game and she likes it, holy shit, like, thank you. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
But then I've made so many very awesome and amazing friends and I've met so many people just because of board games, even before I was doing a show. You know, I mean, I was friends with Mike before I was doing a show, just because of board games. And then, you know, it just drew us together. And now he's one of my best friends. You know, I mean, we talk every day, you know, and I've got so many friends that are like that. It's just a wonderful thing to be able to put out into the world. I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, no, it's something that it means a lot to the folks that are making it, you know, and I think that, like, that's the thing, going back to, like, sort of Mike's comment about sort of the cynicism that our city has faced about, you know, the idea of, like, I wrote down the cash grabs. It's funny because like, if they were all really good, if they were all cash grabs, would we even be here as Tempest Workshop right now?
Right, 100%.
We'd be still.
Yeah, we can tell you some of them were not cash.
Yeah, so some of them were definitely
the literal phrase of the term.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, someone else grabbing our cash maybe, but I think that there's this thing where it's like these. They mean something. They mean something to people, you know. Like, I honestly, and I don't say, like, it sounds like it's being, you know, superfluous, not superfluous. It sounds like I'm over exaggerating, but I really do feel like tabletop games can save people's lives. I mean, you're giving people a vessel that they can connect with other human beings face to face.
Yes,
especially in a world that is just. And you know, I don't have any kids, but I have some nieces and a nephew, and I'm just like, man, kids growing up in this era of social media, combined with the fact that we're still reeling from a pandemic.
Yeah,
I think it's aftermath or not, like, we're still reeling from this era of humanity where we were forced to isolate from one another. I think games that can allow people an opportunity to sort of interface with each other in a safe environment, in a way that people can kind of come together from different backgrounds and celebrate their differences. I think that's just huge. And I'm proud to work in the industry. And it's something that, like, you know, like I said, I grew up playing games, you know, and you know, there was a period in college where I didn't play that many games. I was going to too many parties, but it's the constant where you always come back to it. And it's like, you know, the friends I know that I've known the longest, I knew through games, you know.
Yeah, same. That's crazy. Same.
Yeah. And so it's like, so I'm just trying to provide, I think I just want to give other people a chance to do that. And for us, and don't get me wrong, like, you know, we're talking a lot about us making like great games, you know, or making good games for IPs and all those types of things. And I think in the grand scheme of things, it's like, is the average person, I'm just going to, I don't know, pick an IP. Is the average person who's buying Star Wars Monopoly gonna get what they expect and enjoy that purchase? Probably, to be honest. Like, they're probably like not gamers. They probably like Star Wars and know how to play Monopoly, and they're gonna enjoy that product, you know. And some of us in the industry might look down on that or whatever, but like those aren't games for us, and it's okay too.
Yeah.
Like, but for me, it was I saw Prospero Hall, that imprint, and what we were doing at Funko Games as a chance to like let people dip their toes into that. You know, when I did Funkoverse, like I was hoping that I might get someone to play Funkoverse, and then someday they're gonna have paints and they're gonna be painting miniatures and be playing Warhammer. You know, like that's like in my head the vision.
You had the toyetic factor there too, right? And Funko is a very known property, and so to be able to provide a game that you didn't have to paint, right? Like, here you go. Because I used to play Warhammer, played the shit out of Warhammer, and all my friends made fun of me about how poorly all my miniatures were painted. But guess what? I fielded an army anyways because I love playing and I didn't care. But no, I mean, and that's the really important thing about what you guys did. And I'm was really glad. And again, one of the reasons why I had to reach out to you, Chris, is it's like, no, they're keeping it going. You know, will it be the same thing? Who knows? I had no idea. But at the same time, it's like, wow, a design studio that has a pretty good hit rate. But also, like, there was definitely a very feel good vibe sort of around the stuff you guys are doing because of the kind of people that I'm playing these games with. You know what I mean? And whichever one of you said Trojan horse, right? I mean, it is the Trojan horse of games. I've got a few of them that I have that I'm always like, oh, you like euchre? We're gonna play this, and it's like one level up, but they know how to play euchre. Guess what? Like, now they're buying that game before we even finish, you know, because they're so excited. They're like, how do I get a copy of this? Where do I get this? What's it called again? You know, and I love that. And I really appreciate that you guys are keeping that going. Now, do you guys have like a Twilight Imperium in yet? Are you designing a 6-hour heavy monster of a game?
Well, we can just say this. We pitched 3 games tomorrow that are in that direction. Yes.
Wow.
kind of like what a called shot, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, I've got my Twilight Imperium 3rd edition right over here.
By the way, it's interesting to note that's part of a range. That's not like, it is something that we're pitching. Yes, it's funny that you said that, but it is part of a bigger range of, you would be surprised. Again, it's like, there's so many things we can't talk about right now. If you're in this business long enough, your whole life's one big NDA. It's like, you know,
right.
But we have a comically, hilariously, satisfyingly wide range of opportunities right now that I think that if we could tell you all about it, it would tickle you both.
But now you're not as, I don't want this to sound negative, but now you're not as limited, right? Because before you were working under a certain price model, right? Everything needed to be able to come in this window. You needed a certain MAPP or whatever, or MSRP. You're trying to hit, right? And so now you guys are sort of unburdened by that. Now it doesn't mean you're not going to make those, you know, that style and size of game, and because you could go smaller, but you could also go larger, right? You've got a lot more maneuverability.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to really hammer home here is exactly what you're saying. And I was when I was talking about, for example, Tempest Workshop looking more at like the direct to consumer crowdfunding philosophies or potentials. You know, I don't want to get too into like the details and behind the scenes of everything, but I will say, I don't want to risk breaking any NDAs that I have, but what I'll say is that, for example, like, you know, Korby was the producer on Jurassic World Legacy, but that game didn't always start its lifespan as a game that was designed to be crowdfunded. I'll just put it that way. And so so for us, there's an opportunity now. It's like, oh, well, like if we were going to do a game and we were going to make a, $150 game from the start, that was the goal. Like, what would we do? And
Sure.
You're exactly right, Tim, where it's like right now we don't really have anyone telling us no. Like,
Right.
and so we can do that. But keep in mind though, like while we were always constrained, we were always trying to push the boundaries. Villainous is a great example. There was a lot of folks who had to give Villainous a stamp of approval that were very dubious about whether or not it would be a success. And our studio had to put together the presentations, do the homework, and really pitch the shit out of it to convince people that, hey, there's adult fans of Disney who want a more strategic hobby style experience centered around the villains. And a lot of people were like, that doesn't sound right. That sounds not correct. We're like, please believe us.
All of those people had to eat so much crow.
Well, yeah, but I mean, but to their credit, they did that, it did get made. Yep. And so, but that's an example where it's like, we were always trying to see where we go. Like, again, even back to Goonies, a lot of people wouldn't have the hubris to be like, oh, hey, by the way, licensors, we want to create a whole nother, we want to basically create a trilogy out of your movie that only has one movie. Can we do that?
Right.
And we have, the guts that we're going to ask for that, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the one that we did. I remember sitting in the room and we were like, we're sitting there and we're like thinking about how to win the game. And we're like, okay, well, what's like, at 3 players, how many survivors need to survive for the win and everything? And I was like, dude, at the end of that movie, she lived, right? But does she feel like she won? Probably not. No. And I was like, what if we just say there are no winners? That was weird to put in a game that's designed to be on the shelf at Barnes and Noble or Target or whatever, And so like we were always pushing the boundaries, but now as Tempest Workshop, it's really the sky is the limit. And something else I've been saying in a lot of meetings is like there's this element where we're building the plane while it's in flight,
sure.
but at least we own the plane though.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're at. And so you're going to see a lot of ideas from us that are ideas that have been kind of percolating in our heads, and we now have the freedom to explore that. These games that we're pitching tomorrow that are sort of bigger in scope, are they going to get picked up? We don't know. Are we going to get a chance to make them? We don't know. We hope we do, but we don't know what time. But at least we can try, because it's like, why not try? Like, why not see what's out there?
Hell yeah. No, I think the benefit you guys have though is you have the benefit of your track record and your history. So when you take a big swing that seems weird, you're also like, well, hey, I mean, Bob Ross, hey, like who thought that was going to be a thing, right? So that's got to give you guys a little bit of cachet, I would think. But then, so I know you can't go into like a ton of details, but like, so are you guys, are some of the games that we could expect to see from Tempest, are you guys like unique IPs as well as some licensed stuff?
Yeah, we're exploring a lot of like so there's kind of 2 buckets for unlicensed stuff. There's unlicensed like, oh, this is a game about dogs. There's
sure.
like that kind of. There's also like unlicensed, like this is a fantasy world that we created the narrative for, and there's a whole mythos behind it. We're exploring all of that. Like that's another thing where it's like, again, and we did unlicensed games. We did things that weren't based on IPs, but we never really had a chance to do like world building in that way.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we're eager to explore. Like we just want to go out there and we want to make stuff for us. And really what we're taking away from our experience, most importantly, is like we want to make games with each other. Like we loved doing it, we want to do it, and we want to do it like in a way that we can all feel really proud of what we're making. And I know we have about 20 minutes left or so. I don't actually know how long the show goes, but I will say that to your point, Tim, about us being kind of having this cachet and being fortunate, that's a lot of why Tempest Workshop exists. literally the day after I announced that I had been laid off and that I was, I had no idea what I was going to do. I was like, am I going to look for work? Am I not? Am I going to go back to self-publishing? I don't know. Like immediately people reach out to me. Hey, we've never met. I'm a big fan of Prospero Hall. I'd love to just talk to you. Like, I want to know like what happened. What was it like? Like, I don't have any work for you right now, but like, I just want to see where your head's at. And a couple of these conversations happened. And so basically like, there was enough of this chatter where I was like, that's when I was like, oh, I think people love us. People really liked our stuff, and they want to see it continue.
You do the Sally Field. You like me. You really like
exactly,
me.
Exactly. You really like us. And so right now, if I was like, I could not tell you. Well, let's see. There's like 2 projects that we have that we're actively working on right now, that will be made. We know what those are, but the bulk of what we're doing right now is paring it down. And I will say this as well, like, we're super privileged. Part of this is why we consider our responsibility to like, help out some of the folks that were also former members of the studio. We have not reached out to anybody. All the opportunities that we have are people that reach out to us. And like, that's enough for now for us, which is a really,
that's great,
comfortable place to be in.
Yeah.
But we don't know what it will end up shaking out as. It's funny because it's like you mentioned I don't remember who it was that was at the Unpub room the entire convention.
Martin Wallace.
And you know what, like, I cannot wait until I can get back to the point of Tempest Workshop where I can just sit and design games all day, and you'll find me in the Unpub rooms. Like, that's where I want to be right now. The past couple of months have been a lot of biz dev, a lot of groundwork for building that, and we're just now starting to be able to like put our creative energy behind stuff. And I think we're going to surprise people with what we put out, and I hope that people kind of follow our story, because we're going to be doing cool things. And like I mentioned before, I hope people keep looking out for what Goliath is making. There's a few games that we worked on that are being put out by Goliath that Korby wasn't working on them. I worked on them myself. They're going to be put out by Goliath as part of the acquisition. Our friend Aaron is starting his own publisher where he's going to be kickstarting or I think crowdfunding his own game. He was the lead designer of Villainous. He's doing his own project, and so like, Tempest Workshop is a piece of it. We're gonna do kind of what we want to do. Other people are doing what they want to do, and it's like it's the people. And for me, it was never a question of like, okay, well, the studio is not really the studio anymore. Like, to me, I wasn't really like, I was saddened because I thought we had a lot more potential. Like, I think that for all the success that we had at Funko Games and Prospero Hall, I think we were only at the tip of the iceberg of what our full potential was. And so that bummed me out.
That's true.
But there's never a question about like, oh, we're all going to be doing awesome creative stuff. Like, and so that's kind of,
I would say one thing, and Chris kind of alluded to that there. We are interested in original IP. I mean, for instance, this is an interesting thing to say, but of my 8 years at FBC and Funko Games, my favorite game I worked on was unlicensed. It's a game called Skulk. Actually,
I know Skulk. Yeah,
Mike, could you pull that up real quick? Because I want to say something
that's
about
that
it.
One that's got that like plastic skull.
It's the rose gold skull.
Yeah.
Right. That's my favorite game that I worked on. Now, one of the reasons why I like this thing is because you look at that skull on this pedestal and it's like, this thing has no, where's this thing coming from? Like this is not from it's not a license. It's not nostalgic. I don't know what era this is from. I remember Chris joked and said it's the Glam Reaper, which I thought was great. But to me, it looks like this is like some sort of Miami-Dade cult. Like, I don't know what the story is on this. You look at Skulk and it's like, dude, we could make 15 games expanding this world. Like, they're like, this is the start of something. Why are we doing this? What are these symbols? To me, it's so mysterious. It's so uncertain. And it's not coming from any era or any defined thing. This starts its own thing. And it would have been fantastic to expand this world with other games and sort of make the story from this and figure it out. But there just wasn't time. Like, I think our license to unlicensed ratio, I don't know, 20 to 80 or something. Might even be less.
So
But I think about that, and it's like I feel like that's something that with Tempest Workshop, like we do have the room to explore these type of things, and then God knows down the road, and then it's just like 5 years later, Netflix is like, yeah, we want to do the Skulk animated series or something.
You never know,
we
dude.
don't
You
know.
never know.
We don't know, but we would like to because we're such narrative freaks, and because we're so trained on, storytelling, and we're used to bringing that out with IP in the stories. When we make our own games, we have that. I sold a game last year to Skybound. It's not out again. NDAs. I made an animated trailer for it, and I made a backstory Bible because there's characters in it. It's like we could just expand this and keep going. And and I think most publishers look at that and they're like, whoa, just give us the one game. Just relax there, Korby. But like, we can explore that on our own.
No, but Skybound likes their universes. I mean, I know a little bit about Skybound. And so, yeah, I mean, again, though, you're pitching to companies that make sense with your vibe.
They do, and they understand that. But and for maybe they'll take. I sent them my little story Bible. Maybe they'll take it seriously. I don't know. This is I mean, now I've moved on, so I'm no. It's funny. I don't even own that. It was me working for someone else, and I sold it to them. But even at that time, I was looking at this. I'm like, wait a second. There's a whole story in a universe, and it's a very silly. If I could tell you what it was about, it's a very silly one. But I look at things like this. It's like it would be so fun to like keep going instead of just putting that out and then that's the end of it.
Right.
And even, by the way, even if the game doesn't do well, who cares? We still have this thing, like it's caught our imagination. We want to figure it out and flesh it out. And maybe the 5th game will, it's kind of like, back in the day, someone would put out a single from the album and nobody would care. And then the 2nd single comes out, nobody would care. And then the 3rd one comes out and it's a big hit. And then people are like, wait, what was this first song? Nobody heard. We like this first song too. It's like, there's a path to get there. But things like that are things that we could explore now that we just didn't have the economic feasibility to do. And and for all we know, we don't have the economic feasibility to do it now.
Yeah, but now you've got the opportunity though. You've got you have more of the choice to take some of those swings and see how it goes and everything. I don't know. I think it's badass. I love it. I'm very excited for you guys. I think it's very cool what y'all are doing. And
I have to imagine you probably have a lot of stuff like this where there's just with Prospero, it only got to the tip of the iceberg, and then there's a whole extra chain of things that could come from this that never got explored.
I think that, I mean, so
mechanics or theme even.
So there's some stuff like, well, here's the thing, right? Is we were all employees of Funko Games and Prospero Hall. So a lot of that stuff, like it's not ours to do anything with. So it's like, there's a lot of stuff that unfortunately is never going to see the light of day. That said, it's like we're artists and creatives and we have our own sensibilities. And so like, it's entirely possible for us to expand on like an example. I'll give you an example. At Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I came up with this mechanism. So Aaron Dono was the lead designer on that, and I was also a co-designer on it as well. And I came up with this mechanism where there was personal items in the game because we knew that we wanted people to have asymmetrical characters. And I was like, what if we have like these personal items in the game that at the start of the game, you get a personal item and that gives you your asymmetrical power that you get to use. Cool. And I was like, but our game is telling the story of the fact that when you see that movie, there's, a dozen or so cars in their field. And so these kids showing up aren't the first kids to show up to this house and get slaughtered. Like this has happened a lot. And so our game is like, well, what this happens over and over and over again. And so how do we turn that into the experience of the game? And I was like, well, what if your personal item, when you get killed, if your character dies in the game, you drop your personal item and that personal item stays in the item deck for the next game. And it keeps staying, and you keep it in the item deck forever. And so 2 weeks from now, we're playing Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and we find the backpack, and I was like, "Holy shit, that's Tim's backpack! He got killed by Leatherface like 2 weeks ago. Like that, there's his backpack. That's what happened to him.
Awesome.
How'd that get there?" And that was like sort of my take on like the sort of legacy element, but that was very like sort of confined. But there's nothing to stop us from saying, okay, well, like that was one piece of it. What if we explore that further? What else can we do with that? And so there's those types of things. You're going to see evolutions of that, but it's not like, we left Funko Games and we're like, we have the suitcase of things that we can just tap into.
Yeah.
We got paid a very fair salary for our ideas. And that was the trade-off that we all kind of knew what we were signing up for.
But you guys had the opportunity to design a bunch of different styles of games. And so now you take that over to what you're doing, and whether it's your own IP or, an IP, a unlicensed one that you're working with.
Yeah.
And now you're like, it's not going to be a reskin but you might be like, you know what? I had this mechanic I really wanted to work on in a game, and it really makes sense with this idea, and now you've already even maybe tinkered with it a little bit, because maybe we're working on it with something and it got scrapped. I mean, you've got a toolbox, right? All different kinds of things.
Some of those we might carry in our head, but in general, ideas aren't that hard. They're just not. Ideas, I mean, at the risk of sounding arrogant again, I think just ideas aren't that hard. I think ideas are overrated, actually. I think, or I'll to articulate that better. I don't think the magic is in ideas. I don't, and maybe just, I know people like Chris and Aaron and Brian, and I'm around very brilliant people, and we just don't have a problem with ideas. I think execution's everything.
100%.
Execution is where the magic is. And I think that people overestimate that an idea has all the value, and, oh my God, someone stole my idea, and it's all that. It's like, no. I mean, the example I always come up with is Stranger Things. Stranger Things, great show. But if you would have given me that script and I looked at it, I would be like, okay, this is just 80s pastiche of so many, E.T. and Goonies and Kids on Bikes films and Explorers, and with some sci-fi and some D&D. Like, who cares? Like, there's nothing new here. Now, if you would have shown me a 10-minute reel of what the Duffer Brothers did, I'd be like, holy shit, wait a second. These guys know how to create atmosphere. They know how to cast. That soundtracks is killing it. Like, the execution is amazing, and that's, to me, that's where the magic is. And so so it's funny that I think people are very protective of ideas, and they're accusatory about someone else stealing. I'm like, come on, man, it's really the execution where all that skill and the magic comes out.
Well, and I mean, you can even attribute that on a different level, where it's like, this game, let's just go non-IP idea. This game has 5 mechanics that I absolutely love, so therefore I should love this game. And then you play that game, and it is not what you want it to be. Yeah. So again, execution, right? You put all this together, and if it doesn't come together in the right way, that jambalaya, just doesn't taste right. I mean, you're out.
I mean, I think that it's never a problem coming up with ideas, or at least people I hang out with. It's not
no, sure.
But there are times where you just think, like, does this game need to exist?
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's the bigger question. Like, yeah, we can do this. We can figure out something for this. But it's like, are we feeling this? Does the world need this game? Like, there needs to be that filter, which then again, a lot of people don't have. So in your game in question, I wonder, did they play test that with people? Did they listen to other people? Did they even ask themselves, does this need to be out there?
Sure.
I mean, I don't want to put something out in the world that doesn't need to. That's the Back to the Future example. I could have just gone with what we had, and it was very scary, and we were 3 months in, but I'm like, this isn't it. This isn't the one. I want to put the one out there that and I mean, if it's going to excite me, it's going to excite other people. If it's going to excite the people that are creating it, usually it's going to excite other people. If it's exciting all of us on the staff that are playing it, if we want to keep playing this prototype over and over and over, that's a good sign.
Right.
Usually,
Right. Yep. Mike, I'm sorry, I've probably talked 100 times more than you have tonight. Mike, you got anything else you want to talk about or ask? I've been.
Okay, so I'm curious, because you threw numbers at me, and I like numbers. So you said Walmart bought up 100,000 copies of
Target.
Target.
It was Target exclusive, I believe.
So, I know, like, for example, Horrified is currently the BGG highest ranked game that came from Prospero Hall. Which one actually sold the most copies? That's a hard thing to track sometimes.
I don't think we know, but for the obvious reason, I'm going to assume Villainous and Horrified, just because they're legacy. Now, I do know for a fact, I did the 2 Choose Your Own Adventure games, and I do have the numbers for those. I was told, because I'm still in contact with Shannon Gilligan, who's the CEO of Chisco, and those 7 years later are still doing great.
Yeah.
I mean, are you talking about like the Prospero Hall stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, so here's something like, you know, for better or worse, like the people that like us on the PD team, like we never really were concerned with it or made privy to it. You know, it was something where it was like,
Sure.
obviously we're gamers and we want to know if we're doing good at the game of making games. But it was something that we never really went into. I will say that but here's the thing. Again, this goes back to like, you know, how we were able to afford, you know, giving people healthcare at the studio. One of our biggest hits of the Funko Games era was Ted Lasso. And that's not a Prospero Hall game, but that game sold amazingly well. Scream is one that sold very, very well. You know, so it's like, so it's a challenge because we're really dealing with a lot of different vectors. Like there's the BGG, the hobby crowd, the people that are tuning in to watch this show, and the people that are like, you know, really who go to BGG and care about that stuff. There's that audience and what they hold to a high esteem or high regard. It doesn't always match up. It's part of the reason why people are so quick to yell cash grab, because they really have no actual clue about what sells and what doesn't sell. And so it's very difficult to sort of parse through.
Most of the target IL people are not going to BGG to rate their games and write a full review. I mean, that's just the reality.
Yeah.
Mike, I would also say there's no sort of central reliable source for numbers for anything. I mean,
right.
Publishers say their numbers sometimes, but kind of rarely. And then when they say their own numbers, it's like you just have to trust it. But I mean, those numbers are not public. I mean, they're not, you know,
you can get some numbers. There's like it used to be called NPD. I don't know what they changed, but you can subscribe to different industry analytics. Like there's different ways to kind of like see stuff. But again, it's hard for us to say, you know, like
sure.
We made the games. We hope people liked them, and we hope they did well. You know, like, but yeah, there's probably a lot of stuff that we don't know about the actual details of what's sold. I would imagine, you know, Villainous obviously is still around, so I'm sure it's doing really well. Horrified, I'm sure it's still doing really well.
Right.
Oh yeah.
You know, as far as the Funko game stuff, like I said, Ted Lasso, Scream, you know, those did really well. So. Yeah.
I was just kind of curious because, like I said, you don't see those numbers very often. So when you threw one out, I'm like, well, okay.
Yeah, that one I knew. That was a pre-order number.
Right.
And everyone was so shocked that number was being thrown around the office.
There are people who likely would know what those numbers are.
That's true.
But we are not those people.
You guys weren't in a position to where necessarily, like you said, privy to that info.
Well, there's a whole element where it's like, in some, like, I don't know what it is about me as a creative. And I'm not saying this is necessarily, I'm not saying this is like a value judgment for other folks. I'm just saying for me personally, like and this is maybe a bad thing, I don't know. I really don't give a shit if people if people don't like what I make, as long as there are people that do like what I make.
I mean, you kind of have to be that way though when you put stuff out into the world. You got to have a thick skin, because there's always going to be somebody that goes, "You suck. This is the worst thing I've ever played." There's always going to be somebody.
Totally. And so knowing that, like the quote I always used to say when talking about it is like, we're trying to make games that can be for anyone, but we know that we can't make games that are going to be for everyone. That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. And so that being said, I think there is an element where it's like, in some ways, the production team and the designers were kind of, again, for better or worse, shielded from a lot of information, because it's like y'all just make cool shit. Like we'll deal with the sales and the business stuff. Like, don't concern yourself with that stuff. We want you guys to make awesome games. You know, that's what we want you to concern with. Again, it's for better or worse, right? Because now we're going into this new era where it's like we're starting this new thing. Thanks, Devin. Appreciate that. We're going into this new era where we're starting a new thing. We hope it does well. But like, we weren't the salespeople. We weren't the people that are there. We're having to kind of dig through what we know to kind of calibrate things and look at things and do the archaeology experiment of like, okay, like, what was our best sellers? How did this stuff work? You know, I mean, part of being part of like a 40-person team, you know?
Yeah. And Tim, you're right. You just do your best and you put it out there. And we know. I mean, honestly, I mean, again, I feel like I've made a bunch of arrogant statements tonight.
Yeah,
Here comes
you're
another one.
very arrogant tonight.
But yeah, I'm a pretty confident guy. But I can't think of a game like that I'm embarrassed of. Like pretty much every one, it's like I've made so many games with Brian Kirk, and it's like pretty much every game, like Brian will tell you, we'll play it right now. Like
Yeah.
we kind of want, like, you know, sometimes like we made a Home Alone game that I think is awesome, and I don't think that it gets enough. And sometimes you know how you'll just walk down the street and you're like, like there might be a steak you had once, and you're just thinking about it, like I could go for that steak right now. Sometimes I walk down the street and I'm like, play some Home Alone right now, like that, like I'm hungry for it, you know. But it's interesting, like you put stuff out in the culture, and there's so many things that you know, there's some of the most mundane reasons can make something sell or not. That has nothing to do with the game.
100%.
And it has nothing to do with the license. Has nothing to do with like anything, or just one publisher just isn't on the ball with you know, the market. I mean, there's 10,000 things, so it's kind of hard to get caught up in what's successful or not. And then things can find their audience. They will. You know, I always think of like Office Space. That movie came out in 1999. Everyone yawned at it. It made nothing. And then now it's like, it is so in our culture, and it found its audience on cable. Like, so to a certain extent, there is the business, and you need these things to make money. But the step back and like from an artistic point of view, if we do something good, we know it's damn good. And then people will find it or they won't.
Yeah, the stuff that has legs, it's gonna walk, it's gonna go, and it'll hang around. You know, that's a good point.
There's also an element, and I want to be very careful with like how I word this, but like we're part of all these sort of niche hobbies that we all partake in. You know, games, if it's like professional wrestling, like whatever it is. Consumers, because we make it such a part of our lives, and we're so passionate about it, we oftentimes think we know things that we don't really know, and we don't really have as much information as we think we do. And there's and so for me, you know, there's no products that I'm embarrassed of. There's some games I put out that I'm not like, I think could have been better. There's a game I did once that from the time the project was greenlit to when the files were due, we had about 4 weeks to do it. I would have liked more time to do that, and I think I could have made a better game at the end result. But I did it, and we got something that I thought was pretty good. And people can play it, and they might not like it, but they don't know that I had to walk through fucking broken glass to get there.
Right.
Like they don't understand that, and so it's like their opinion of it is not reflective of my experience making it at all.
Yeah.
And so
you have to separate that.
Yeah. And so again, it's very challenging and don't get me wrong. I have a ton of peers who struggle with it. And I, at times, like it annoys me. Like I always make the joke where like, once I have left Funko Games, I was like, I would love to do a React channel where I get to react to all the reviewers who are reviewing my game.
Yeah.
I would love to be like, actually, here's why I disagree with this point, or here's why that decision was made. You had no idea that a licensor demanded that we do this thing. You didn't know. Like, how could you know? Yeah. So there's those types of things.
That's why I love all the behind the scenes conversations. A lot of times, especially like, you know, when it's not on camera and people can, you know, okay, so what happened here? I know something happened. What happened here? Yeah. And people can really tell you, because I do, Chris, to your point, like so many people take that for granted, you know, especially when they are not self-publishing, you know, and self-publishing is so hard as it is, because it's just one person, you know, maybe two people. And so, I mean, the flip side of that is you're answering to a corporation, you're answering to bosses, you're answering, you know, to a much higher power. There's deadlines and there are all kinds of restrictions. And sometimes stuff will come in where you might, I'm just going to assume you might turn in something and they're like, no, this got vetoed, this got vetoed, this got vetoed, or they don't want to focus on this, or they don't want to highlight that, you know, bring me something else yesterday.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify one point, because I'm not suggesting that people who aren't in the industry cannot have opinions
Oh,
about
not at
games,
all.
about things.
Not at all,
But,
man.
but
Not
for
at all.
me, I think that there's a very clear distinction, right, between I don't like this game because of these reasons, and a value judgment about the people that made it. And
Well,
when you say things are like a cash grab, what you're implying is that the person who made this didn't really put any effort in it,
Yeah.
don't really care about the end product, weren't even trying to make a good thing. They were only after it for the money, and that's a value judgment. Like that's implying a lot about the people that make it.
That is the
It could be
beauty
a
of
bad
the
game.
internet.
It could be a game that you don't like, and that's okay. That's like, to me, that's fair. Like I don't like every game. That's very fair.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like the one thing I say is, when I was game development team lead and I would be interviewing people to come work for Funko Games and be designers there, I have one interview question that is the most important. Actually, it's technically two questions that are the most important questions I ask game designers that are thinking about working for me and my team. I say, what is your least favorite game? And when they answer, I say, why do people love that game? And you have to be able to, as a designer, get into that mindset where I can understand the difference between not liking something, but why someone would like something.
Yeah.
Because really all that matters in the design industry is empathy.
Yeah.
I am not making a game that I'm going to buy. We'd sell one copy. I'm making a game that a lot of other people, I'm making a game for other people, and I have to get in their mindset.
I'm such a nerd. Yeah. I would be the only one that would want the game that I want. Right. But yeah, no. And even as a reviewer, there's a lot of times where we look at games, and if there's a game that I don't like, a lot of times I see I'll say I will usually say more positive things about the game than negative. But then at the end of the day, I'm like, but this just didn't land with me, or this didn't work for me. Because you do have to take into consideration, like, somebody worked really hard on this. What were they trying to accomplish when they made this? But yes, internet culture, right? Cash grab. You say cash grab, no consequences. You just say it, you just throw it out there. Just like people say all kinds of garbage on the internet. This sucks. It's terrible, and everybody that makes it is terrible. And it's like, well, that's not really true. But they just love to cast these, wide nets.
I mean, I actually love reading reviews. I think it's part of the process, and I think it's pretty easy to suss out when someone's having that internet attitude, and then I've read all sorts of criticisms of the game I've done, and I'm like, yeah, fair point. Yeah. I mean, and
sure.
sometimes they were like, it is like what we're talking about. Like, oh yeah, well, there's a story behind that. But sometimes it's like, you know what? Never thought about that. Good point.
Yeah,
you got
100%.
it. I kind of like whenever anyone's like a filmmaker or someone that's like, I never read my reviews. I'm like, this is part of the. I mean, this is all about communicating with other people and connecting. I love reading reviews. I like seeing how did it land. I like seeing was it understood? Was it well seen? I'm always looking for I always keep a Google Doc once my game's out about if somebody pointed something out that we're. Usually there's not anything that's flat out broken because we play test like crazy, but maybe they're like, wow, I mean, the verbiage on this was a little vague or something. I'm saying, okay, that's good. And we'll actually keep a record of all that. But I think this is part of the conversation is the reviews and give me the bad along with the good. I don't need people to just talk about how great it is. Because sometimes people will point out stuff that I hadn't thought of, or that's a really good point, or wow, what you just said, we could do a whole other game out of that, or it's to me, it's a really sort of thrilling part of the whole conversation. It's connection,
Well, yeah, and again, right, and there's also a difference when people are coming at it from a constructive or even a personal place versus just the troll aspect.
But you can always tell.
Oh, you can totally tell. You can totally tell.
Pretty clear.
Yeah, you can totally tell. And I mean, you're 100% correct. People that have a genuine reaction that they feel they need to share, that's something you at least consider. If they're the only person that felt that way, well, then maybe that's the outlier.
Yeah,
but if 100 people say that, we're like, okay, well, something's there, right? I mean, I work in customer service, Mike works in sales, I work in sales. we deal with a lot of people, on a daily basis, and even just as the content creation, thing that we do for fun, like some of our more viewed videos, we get absolutely hammered on because they hate what we said about it. And I'm always like, I try to respond either, yes, you have a really good point. We didn't see this at the time. Now I get it. Or I understand what you're saying. I just don't agree with you, and I think we should be allowed to, inhabit that space, in that way.
Yeah. There's also the element for like designing, like, again, and this is almost like a pep talk from my peers. There's also an element for like designing like IP driven stuff that I have no control over. Like,
oh, sure.
I can't change the last season of Game of Thrones. I didn't.
Please do.
The fact that you don't like this property or you don't like this thing, like I didn't make that thing. Like,
yeah.
So there's a whole other like element of like being able to disassociate from the opinions. But I mean, Korby's right. It's like I read the stuff and I take it to heart. I mean, again, like you don't become a game developer without being able to take criticism and feedback. Like you don't last very long in this industry if you can't. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like there is this level of like of the value statements, and it's just people just don't know. They just don't know. Like it's a challenge in the era of like I said, these niche hobbies where people can kind of find their little echo chambers and just live.
Yeah,
there.
You live in your bubble. Yeah.
I'm here for the designer live react. I want to see that. That would be so entertaining. I don't care if we have to facilitate it. The rundown designer react. I'm ready for it.
I feel like that's like when I don't know if it's Fallon or Jimmy Kimmel that does like the celebrities read the mean tweets about themselves.
Yeah,
like I feel like
I pitched that. I wanted us to. We were doing TikToks at Funko Games. And I pitched that, and I was like, I want the designers to read some of these comments about the stuff we're making, and I was like, just because it's like, especially again, part of the Prospero Hall thing, and I do have to go in a little bit. So
oh, you're good. Yeah, we can wrap up.
We can talk about it maybe some other time, but the downside to the Prospero Hall sort of model of this like pen name is that, again, I compared it to like Willy Wonka's factory, right? Where it's like, there's something, there's probably people that work in that building, but you've never seen them go in or out, and you don't really know what they're up to in there. So there's this level of like, people don't even understand that, like, when you're talking shit about like, some product, and you're accusing the person who made it of like, not being, very scrupulous, like you're talking about a human being who made that. It's like, these games aren't like made by like, 100 monkeys at typewriters or something like that. It's like, these are made by human beings who honestly, earnestly love this industry, love what games mean to people, and are trying to do their best, period. Like, like it's just something that's so easy to ignore or to look past. But like every single thing we did, like we put our all into and we cared about deeply. And that goes from like, Jurassic World Legacy, like Korby said, spending years of his life, getting off the ground with 18 other people, to Kenny G, keeping it sexy, to Monster Crunch cereal, to Goonies. Like we really, truly tried our best to do the best job we could do.
Well, honestly, Chris, though, if you hadn't, you guys wouldn't be in the position you are right now. Right. I mean, they would be like, people would not be calling you the day after you've been laid off going, hey, what are you doing? What's up? You would not be in that position if you were hacks. I'll just put it out there. I'm just dying to know, because I don't know you guys very well, and I want to know you guys. And I'll ask you this and I'll let you go. We'll let you go for the night. What are some of your favorite games? Like not that you'd necessarily design, but like if you're going to play a game, like Chris is going to a buddy's house, he's going to play a game. Korby's going to a friend's house, he's going to play a game. What's a game you want to play? What's a game you love?
I'll say one just because I played it 2 months ago and I can't stop thinking about it, and that is Cat in a Box.
Oh, okay.
You guys play Cat in a Box? I played it twice and I can't stop thinking about it. And it's been a while since a game has done that to me, because I'm like, who are you? What do you want? Game? Like, I'm still trying to figure it out. And I haven't played it since, but I keep playing it through my head, and it was weird. It took me a while. It's like, it's a trick taking game, but it's like, no, it's not. It's an area control game, and it's
and that is why I get so mad at that game, because I want to play a trick-taking game, and it's not. Yeah. And I love area control games, but I can't. I'm trying to do trick-taking. I hate that game. It drives me nuts.
Makes you think about trick-taking in a very different way. That's
but it is super well designed. That is a me problem with that game. That is not that game's problem. That is a Tim problem.
It is a Tim problem.
It is a Tim problem.
So it's been a long time since I've had a chance to really play the games I love. So I'll kind of speak in generalities. One, I'm a huge miniatures fan. I mentioned that earlier.
Did you play Warhammer?
I have Warhammer figures, right? You can't see them. They're right here.
Nice.
My favorite miniatures game of all time is Malifaux.
I've heard a lot of good things.
A lot of Funkoverse is standing on the shoulders of Malifaux in a way. Like a lot of the philosophies behind Malifaux I carried over to Funkoverse. I also love role-playing games. Don't get a chance to play those as much as but that's how I kind of got started in this hobby. I went to a local game store because I was trying to buy some source books for Dungeons and Dragons, and I learned that there were other games that existed. There were games, and then generally when it comes to board games, I'm a fan. I play all sorts of ones. I wish I could play more campaign legacy stuff because it's just so time consuming. It's a challenge, but really my sweet spot is I would say middleweight strategy games that are with theme, like ones I really like. And this might be, I'm kind of dating myself a bit, but a couple. I'm not really close to the newish either. But Orleans,
hell yeah,
Deus,
nice.
Those are two of the games.
Oh, I love that game.
Those are both games that I bought the inserts, I bought all the stuff for them, bought all the upgrade packs because it's I just love those kind of tight middleweight experiences. Those are kind of my go-tos, but I am very much an omni gamer where I will play everything. I'll play Lacerda games. I've never had a chance to play any Splotter games. Right now we're playing through the campaign of Mythwind. Me and my roommate are playing through some of Mythwind, which does some really cool stuff. I love Cockroach Poker. I love it all. I play Magic the Gathering. I have a bunch of commander decks, so I'm kind of all over the place when it comes to games. But if you the game I tell people when people ask me my favorite game, because that's a question you get a lot.
Yeah.
I always it's hard for me to say, but I always just say diplomacy. And, and I'll tell you why. It's because when I was a kid, we used to play diplomacy games at my local game store, and it was so cool because me and my we would have our diplomacy session. Two of us would leave. We'd go around the block to there was a bar down the block. We weren't old enough to go in, but they always have live music on Fridays. And so I'd look at whoever's playing Germany. I'd be like, live music? Yeah, let's go. We would talk about
make your plan.
The back alleyways come back, and it was such an eye-opening experience because that was the first game that I ever saw where the game is not happening at the game board, it's happening around. It's when you walk into the game store and there's a diplomacy game going, you see these people huddling over there. What are they doing? Oh, they're playing that game. They're and so I bring it up as an example. It just changed the way that I thought about games in a very cool way. So that's the one I kind of lean to. And I also, from a mechanic standpoint, I love simultaneous action selection. That's my favorite mechanic of all time.
Hell yeah.
So I like that aspect of it too. But yeah.
No, that's awesome. Those are great examples. I love diplomacy because again, that's one of those games where you're gaming the other gamers, as much as you are the board. And I know Mike is also a fan of that style of game. We both kind of. I'm not a great poker player, but like Korby, I will play poker with anybody. And I also I'm the animated guy at the table because I'm trying to bring people out of their shell, so just kind of doing that stuff. I feel like I got a kindred spirit, over there. But you guys have been awesome. I really appreciate how candid you've been, with your stories and everything. I really, really, really would love to have y'all back on again sometime. And maybe when you got some projects, going that we can talk about, if you got stuff you want to, holler about and let people know, please, please, please consider us as a platform, come on and talk about it. I'm really glad, Chris, thank you so much for being receptive to the invitation. It It means a lot to me, man.
Yeah, and I'd love to get a chance to also, like, some of the other folks that we work with. It'd be cool.
Please do.
To talk to you too, because we are a team. Like, that's either me and Korby and Isaiah, we could have all went off and did our own things, but there's a reason why we came together. It's because of the team, and we love making games with these people.
Y'all are doing something right. I mean, clearly,
Thanks.
you've had a ton of success. You're doing something right.
Super excited to see what you guys come up with, for sure. Real fast story before you guys go.
Sure.
So I was between gaming groups quite a bit, and one of my gaming groups was just a roommate and our mutual friend who was a neighbor. And the only games we played were the ones that I bought and taught to these two guys. Well, after a few months of gaming, the neighbor bought his first game and brought it over and taught it to us, and it was big money.
Oh, nice.
That was one. Big Money was one of the first games that I designed at Force Present Creative. That was I was working on that stuff when they were making Villainous. There was a bunch of designers that were working on Villainous, and I did some work on Villainous, but not that much. But so I had to do all the other stuff that wasn't Villainous. And Big Money was one of the first ones. And I was like Yahtzee meets Machi Koro.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say to this day, it might still be the only game he owns.
Awesome. Love it.
Right.
That's awesome.
But well, thank you again, guys, for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us. I really appreciate it. I love it. I mean, if anything, this show was for me. This was totally self-serving because I love to get to hear all of this stuff and like, because Prospero Hall was just, I mean, that's it. It was just that. It was a stamp on a box, and you don't, it's a design house. Sure. Great. Yeah. Wonderful. I mean, but faceless, I didn't know anybody involved
yeah.
Couldn't have named anybody. I only knew that Scott Rogers did some stuff for like Marvel Villainous, because I kind of followed, what he was doing and stuff. But I mean, otherwise, like, I didn't have a ton of knowledge. And so to have you guys shine some light on that is amazing,
That's great.
Definitely.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Mike and Temp, this was a blast.
Yeah. Thank you, Korby and Chris. You guys are amazing. I really appreciate y'all. And yes, we will have you on again. Mike, you got anything else before we sign off?
I don't. It was awesome, guys. Let's do it again. And I'm serious about Designer Live React. That's going to catch on.
Oh my God.
I love it.
I
gotta think about it.
I forget who's coming on next, but I feel bad for him. We might have to pitch that too, but see how they do. But all right, guys, for the board game rundown, I've been Tim.
I was Mike.
Yes.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Korby.
We will see you guys next time. Thank you so much for watching.
Take care, y'all.
We'll see you guys.
Good
next
job,
time.
Stonemeyer.
A 7.3 repeating. Heating.